Even though Su Li didn't touch me or visibly discharge electricity, I could still feel the effects of the electric current enveloping my body. However, just as Zhu Ying said, his current was way too weak. I had long gotten used to being in Zhu Ying's electric field, making me practically immune to electrical attacks. Besides, with that pathetic amount of power from Su Li, I didn't feel threatened at all. If that current had been sustained longer, it might have had some effect. But with Zhu Ying standing right there, Su Li didn't stand a chance. "My turn," I said, a cold smile creeping onto my face. Su Li was still in shock that his ability had no effect. The moment he heard me, he instantly sensed the danger. But before he could even react or order his men, I was already right in his face. Physically, I was now on par with a level 2 paranormal. Moreover, my ability was related to brain evolution, whereas Su Li was so overconfident in his power that he didn't even bother keeping a safe distance. In my eyes, his movements were as slow as a crawling turtle. With just a straight kick to his knee, Su Li let out a blood-curdling scream and collapsed. Immediately after, I threw a heavy punch right at his nose. A sickening crack echoed as agonizing pain instantly spread across his face. His nose was completely caved in, blood streaming down his face. At the same time, the cold barrel of a gun pressed against his forehead, causing Su Li's entire body to tremble uncontrollably. Don't shoot. Boss, don't shoot. Please," he begged in sheer panic. "Eldest miss, for the sake of all the years I've followed you, please put in a good word for me." "What did you just say?" Xiang Shuahai glared at him coldly. "You have nothing to do with me anymore, remember? Even if Captain Jiang didn't make a move, I would have dealt with you myself. If it weren't for Su Li, she wouldn't have lost face in front of me." Even though this was just the action of a former subordinate, with Xiang Shuahai's personality, she couldn't help but feel responsible. Su Li ending up in this state was entirely his own doing. Hearing those words, Su Li's heart sank. Realizing it was hopeless to beg Xiang Shuahai, his only option was to turn and plead with me. "If you need anything from me, just say the word. As long as I can help, I'll do absolutely everything in my power," he practically screamed. I originally intended to shoot him dead on the spot, but on second thought, I let out a soft chuckle. "I'll spare your miserable dog life for now." Before Su Li could even rejoice, a powerful surge of electricity struck him from above in the very next second. He shrieked miserably, his hair standing on end as his body convulsed violently. He collapsed to the ground instantly, the excruciating pain spreading through his entire body, making him want to roll around in despair. "Now do you know what real electricity feels like?" Zhu Ying smiled, tiny arcs of lightning still coiling around her fingertips. Su Li's subordinates shuddered in terror upon witnessing this scene. If even Su Li was beaten this miserably, any rebellious thoughts the others might have had were instantly extinguished. Su Li lay flat on the ground like a dead dog, his limbs still twitching nonstop, his spiked hair looking like it had just been blown up. I looked at him indifferently and said, "Now, you answer whatever I ask. If you don't want to suffer anymore, got it?" I had absolutely no intention of showing Su Li any mercy. Sparing his life was already the greatest act of grace. He didn't dare say another word, just nodding frantically, his voice broken. Whatever you need, Jay, just ask." He usually used electricity to torture others. He never expected that today it would be his turn to be electrocuted into such a pathetic state. Zhu Ying's ability was truly too powerful, completely exceeding his imagination. From the minibus, Song Hini watched the entire scene unfold, utterly astounded. She had guessed that my companions and I were strong, but she never expected us to be this overwhelmingly powerful. A tank, paranormal abilities, and terrifying suppressive power. Even the people from Shanghai had absolutely no power to resist when standing before us. I then started my questioning. How many people are in Shanghai? How long has it been established? Shanghai is organized into small squads, Su Li hurriedly answered. Level 2 paranormals like me usually lead a squad to operate outside. As for those who are stronger, I don't know their whereabouts. But I do know that Shanghai actually belongs to just one person. All decisions are made by him. It's just... I've never met him. Is that so? I muttered softly. Level 2 paranormals weren't a threat to me, but I had to be cautious of anyone stronger. The fact that even the subordinates had never met the leader of Shanghai made everything all the more mysterious. With Shiyu observing from the side, I could be certain Su Li wasn't lying. In this situation, he wouldn't dare lie anyway, especially with Zhu Ying still playing with electric arcs and looking at him with an amused gaze. Shanghai hasn't been established for long, Su Li continued. From what I know, they've been continuously collecting mutant cores through every possible means. But it seems they aren't expanding their equipment, they only trade with a few outsiders. As for what the big shots behind the scenes are actually plotting, I really have no idea. He spilled everything he knew. He was just a wandering survivor, holding zero loyalty to any base. When forced to choose between his own life and keeping Shanghai's secrets, he would naturally choose to save his own skin first. Does Shanghai have a lot of diesel? I asked next. Yes. Su Li hastily replied. After Shanghai was established, they hoarded all the strategic resources from other camps, practically sweeping clean every searchable place in Jinling City. They have their own private oil depot with a massive fuel reserve. I nodded, then suddenly asked, what about the plague? What do you know? Su Li froze for a moment before awkwardly saying, about that. I heard it might be a mutated zombie virus, or maybe a variant of rabies. It's the apocalypse anyway, so a mutated rabies virus is pretty normal, right? Seeing him rack his brains, I immediately realized I had asked the wrong person. He only knew superficial information about the virus and had absolutely no clue about its true nature. I suddenly remembered the blue liquid that Luo had swallowed. Thinking about the evolutionary fluid, I fell silent. Seeing my silence, Su Li grew even more panicked and hurriedly said, I've told you everything I know. I shot him a glance and said coldly, you want to leave? No rush. You're coming with me. You're going to lead the way to Shanghai's headquarters. I said with a smile. Having decided to head straight into Shanghai's lair, I naturally couldn't let Su Li leave first to sound the alarm. He forced a stiff smile that looked uglier than crying. He clearly understood my intention, but had absolutely no right to refuse. Just then, Zhang Hai and Sun Kuan also stepped out of the tank. The two of them were already in a sorry state, but seeing Su Li looking even more pathetic, they immediately gloated. They exchanged a look and burst into mocking laughter, making Su Li's face turn purple with rage. Zhang Hai, Sun Kuan, let Yusin check your wounds. I said, we're fine, Brother Jiang. Just a few scratches. Zhang Hai patted his chest loudly, but immediately winced in pain right after. Seeing that they still had the energy to joke around, I knew they weren't seriously injured. With just a bit of basic treatment from Li Yusin, they would quickly recover and be back to their tough selves. At this moment, Xiang Shuahai walked over, looking apologetic. Captain Jiang, I'm truly sorry about this. I never expected this to be caused by people who used to be from the Subei camp. You don't need to apologize. This has nothing to do with you, I replied. When she was in Subei, Xiang Shuahai could control her subordinates. But after she left, and the camp fell into hardship, losing control was inevitable. This was completely beyond her control. Besides, with Zhang Hai and Sun Kuan's personalities, they wouldn't blame her either. As long as you don't mind, that's good. Hearing my words, Xiang Shuahai smiled in relief. She was an open-minded person. Since I said I didn't mind, she wouldn't torture herself over it. After all, constantly worrying wouldn't solve anything. Actually, I'm really hoping for a chance to make it up to you. Xiang Shuahai said, a subtle, alluring glint flashing in her eyes. My heart skipped a beat. For a moment, I wasn't sure if she had an ulterior motive, or if I was just overthinking things. Under Li Yusin's treatment, Zhang Hai and Sun Kuan quickly recovered. After a brief rest, the group immediately set off. Su Li was forced to lead the way, followed by my minibus and the tank. He originally planned to return triumphantly with the tank in his hands, never expecting to end up in this situation. Even as a paranormal with a robust physique, his exploded hair from the electrocution couldn't be fixed right away. Coupled with the humiliation of having to obediently lead the way, his resentment reached its peak. The convoy rolled down the road, heading straight for Shanghai's headquarters. This so-called headquarters was actually a luxurious villa complex situated on a mountain in Jinling. The scenery here was picturesque, the atmosphere elegant, like a paradise isolated from the city's noise. Before the apocalypse, Even having money didn't guarantee you could live here. But after Shanghai took over, they erected high walls and set up numerous armed checkpoints, making the entire area look incredibly heavily guarded from the outside. At this moment, the guard station high above spotted a convoy approaching from a distance. Normally, there was no shortage of vehicles entering and leaving Shanghai's headquarters, so this wasn't unusual. But the minibus trailing behind was way too eye-catching. In the middle of the apocalypse, who would drive a vehicle like that? And right behind that minibus was... What the hell is that? A tank? A guard's eyes widened in disbelief. How could there be a tank in Jinling? Meanwhile, our convoy continued rumbling straight toward the headquarters. The sound of the tank's treads grinding against the concrete road let out a heavy, muffled roar, leaving long cracks in its wake. The gate guards had only ever seen tanks in movies and on the news. This was the first time they were witnessing a real one with their own eyes. Open the gate. Suli stuck his head out the car window and barked angrily at the guards above. Oh, it's Brother Su. The tense guards immediately breathed a sigh of relief upon recognizing him. Are these vehicles your spoils of war? A squad leader chuckled as he approached, striking up a conversation while ordering his men to open the gate. Suli didn't bother replying, only feeling as if a pair of eyes were glued to his back. He let out a soft snort, clearly not wanting to drag out the conversation. Brother Su, you're truly amazing. When can I tag along with you? Guarding this gate all day has no future. The squad leader continued his relentless flattery. As soon as the gate opened, Suli waved his hand, signaling the convoy to enter quickly. Those words falling on his ears only made him feel grated and annoyed. Once the minibus and tank were inside, the guards remained rooted to the spot, watching in awe. Stop! A cold female voice rang out right next to Su Li's ear. He instantly shuddered and hurriedly stepped out of the car. He had felt like he was being watched for a while now, and at this moment, that fear became even more palpable. Good thing he hadn't done anything stupid, otherwise he probably wouldn't be alive right now. Captain Jiang. Su Li stood in front of the minibus, waiting for me to open the door and step out. I've brought you to Shanghai's headquarters. My job here is done. I nodded. Even though we had arrived, I still needed to find the storage depot, the person in charge here, and more importantly, the top leader Su Li had mentioned. But at that very moment, Su Li's face suddenly stiffened. At the same time, I felt a slight vibration in my pocket. Looking down, I saw Luoluo poking its head out, its eyes glaring fixedly at Su Li. I was momentarily confused, unsure why Luoluo was paying so much attention to him. When I looked up, I saw Su Li staring at me unblinkingly. If you had killed Su Li earlier, things wouldn't have gotten this complicated. You're truly lucky you didn't touch him, otherwise you would have been in deep trouble. A cold, eerie sentence suddenly slipped from Su Li's mouth. The way he referred to himself in the third person made me instantly realize something was terribly wrong. Before the apocalypse, this would sound absurd, but after the apocalypse, it made perfect sense. This could only prove one thing. The person talking to me right now wasn't Su Li. A psychic paranormal. I was secretly horrified. A psychic paranormal that even Xiu hadn't detected. The words Su Li just spoke also revealed that he might have been a trap from the very beginning. From the previous tank ambush, the true target of the mastermind behind the scenes was clearly me. If I had killed Su Li back then, it very likely would have triggered an unimaginable consequence. And because I didn't, the enemy used Su Li to lead me straight to Shanghai's headquarters. A flurry of thoughts flashed through my mind in the blink of an eye. Without a moment's hesitation, I sprang backward. At the same time, Su Li let out a furious roar, his face twisting savagely, veins bulging, as he lunged at me with terrifying speed. It wasn't just him. His subordinates also shrieked and charged forward in unison. I instantly realized they had all turned into the infected. Right now, I was the only one outside the vehicle. The situation was extremely dangerous. This was clearly the moment the enemy had been waiting for. But no matter how scheming he was, he never expected that I always carried a mutant beast with me. With a whoosh, Luoluo shot out of my pocket like lightning, its body inflating in an instant, turning into a giant sphere that blocked the path between me and the infected. Bam! The ones leading the charge, including Su Li, slammed into the sphere before they could even react and were bounced backward. In that split second, I spun around and dashed back toward the vehicle. Uft, uft. Luo instantly deflated, shrinking into a streak of light and darting straight into the vehicle through the closing door. Bang, bang. The infected slammed heavily against the door, but the MCV's door was so sturdy that they were completely helpless against it. Immediately after, a surge of electricity ran along the vehicle's body, causing the infected to howl in pain as they were blasted away. I turned and looked through the window, coldly observing the infected outside. I had almost fallen right into this trap. What's going on? Terrified voices rang out inside the vehicle. Shiyu even turned pale. These infected. Song Hini trembled, her face deathly pale. Living, breathing people suddenly going mad and turning into ferocious creatures that wanted to eat others alive was too massive a shock for her. Even knowing they couldn't break into the vehicle, she was still so terrified that she kept backing away. Only when she saw Zhu Ying and the others remaining calm, with Yusin even daring to step closer to the window, did she reluctantly compose herself. That psychic paranormal has been controlling Su Li for a long time, probably since the moment we entered Jinling. Shiyu said, her voice still trembling. It wasn't until Su Li spoke that she sensed the presence of another psychic force, one so cold it gave her an instinctive feeling of suppression. That psychic force, it's like ice. Just touching it makes me feel like it wants to swallow my mind. Just thinking about it gives me the creeps. If Su Li had been controlled for a long time, then these people suddenly turning into the infected wasn't hard to understand. And that further proved the plague was directly connected to Shinhai's headquarters. Xiang Shuahai quickly caught on, her voice dropping. These people, they're artificially creating the infected. In truth, from the moment I saw the evolutionary fluid, I had a vague feeling this wasn't a natural disaster. And now, it was clear that Shinhai's headquarters was the source. I have a theory, Yusin said, standing close to the door, her hand resting on the glass. Outside, the twisted faces of the infected, including Su Li, were pressed tightly against it. Su Li is stronger than the previous infected, and among this group, he's still the strongest. The fluid in his body is different too, she analyzed. The evolutionary drug is likely divided by concentration. The stronger the paranormal, the stronger the drug they can withstand. And Shinhai collecting mutant cores is precisely to create increasingly stronger infected. Based on her extraction experience and observations, she believed her theory was almost entirely correct. She just needed a sample from Su Li's body for a definitive answer. Why is that psychic paranormal targeting us? Zero frowned and asked. I replied in a deep voice. He probably wants to turn us into the infected. If the paranormals in Shinhai were all test subjects, then targeting outside paranormals like us was a given. The enemy had deliberately lured us here and set this trap. Trying to trap me? Fine. I'll drag him out. I said coldly, fury blazing in my eyes. Just then, Su Li suddenly raised his hand, aiming straight at the vehicle. A thought flashed through my mind. Could the infected still use their abilities? But before I could finish the thought, Zhu Ying slammed her hand onto the vehicle's body. A fierce surge of electricity ran along the hull, blasting Su Li away. With Zhu Ying here, he had absolutely no chance to use his electrical powers. The remaining infected, despite being knocked back, still charged forward recklessly. If they wanted to fight, we'd give them one to the bitter end. I gave the order, and Ying immediately accelerated. The MCV roared, maneuvering with insane agility under Ying's control. Bam! 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 One by one, the infected were sent flying, then crushed. Against the might of the MCV, even though they were stronger than normal zombies, they were mercilessly pulverized. I can roughly sense his location, Shiyu said. That psychic paranormal had exposed a flaw while controlling the infected. Head there, I replied. Ying immediately changed direction, leaving the last of the infected behind, and sped toward the location Shiyu pointed out. The mountain villa complex was larger than I thought. The mountain itself was an entire tourist area, surrounded by numerous resorts. The MCV and the tank tore down the internal roads, but the place we were heading wasn't the center of Shinhai's headquarters. It was a secluded area. Very quickly, we stopped in front of a quiet resort. There were no other buildings around, but the atmosphere was eerily gloomy. That psychic paranormal might be hiding in here. I had just spoken and was preparing to force the enemy out when, right at that moment, a group of people suddenly walked out of a building. Abnormal waves of energy radiated from them, so powerful that the surrounding air felt like it was freezing over. When I saw that group appear, my expression barely changed. This was Shanghai's headquarters, and from the moment I decided to pursue them here, I was mentally prepared for any situation. I was just about to order Ing to prepare for an attack when the group parted to the sides, and from behind them, a man dressed in black slowly walked out. The moment this man appeared, Xiang Shuahai and the others simultaneously felt a sudden wave of dizziness wash over them. Everyone instinctively looked toward him, but they couldn't see his face clearly. Their thinking became sluggish, as if they were drunk. Shiyu's eyes widened. Her gray eyes now looked like thousands of stars were swirling within them, but her face was deathly pale. The moment the man appeared, a massive psychic force enveloped the entire area, like an invisible force field. Shiyu gritted her teeth to resist, pouring out all her psychic power to expand and erect a mental shield to protect everyone. Once the shield formed, Xiang Shuahai and the others felt slightly better. But even though they were no longer dizzy, they still couldn't make out the man's face. This feeling was incredibly bizarre. He was standing right in front of them, with absolutely nothing blocking him, yet no one could remember what he looked like. Clearly, his psychic power was so strong that it directly distorted human perception. I stared intently at the man in black, a heavy feeling rising in my chest. Who was he? And why was his psychic power this overwhelmingly strong? The man in black spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it echoed clearly in everyone's ears. Jiang Lushi, a pleasure to meet you. There was even a hint of amusement in his voice, as if he were genuinely greeting an old acquaintance. The fact that he knew my name didn't surprise me. He had clearly been watching us for a long time. Are you the one Suli mentioned? The leader of Shanghai? Zhu Ying asked coldly. The man in black smiled. The leader of Shanghai? Not exactly. I should say, Shanghai is me. I frowned. What did he mean? The man continued, his voice calm, but full of pressure. In your eyes, Shanghai is an organization I founded. The people of Jinling think so too. But in reality, Shanghai is me. The people in Shanghai aren't my subordinates. They are my children. My will is their will. As soon as he finished speaking, the paranormals standing around him instantly turned ferocious. They spread out, surrounding us. Each of their eyes was filled with bloodlust, no different from the infected. My heart went cold. I now understood the true meaning behind his words. You used the plague to control all of them. That's right, the man chuckled softly. You guessed perfectly. That's why I said Shanghai is me. Actually, my name is also Shanghai. He slowly walked toward me, yet he gave off the feeling of standing in another dimension, completely untouchable. Facing this man, I felt a rare sense of dread. How could someone like this exist in the world? Controlling an entire organization, turning everyone into puppets, and possessing such terrifying psychic power. Could he be a psychic paranormal who used his own psychic power to create the plague and manipulate people? If that were true, he had to be at least a level 3 paranormal. After the apocalypse, level 2 paranormals weren't uncommon, but level 3 was practically unheard of. What kind of miraculous encounter did he have to evolve to that level? Did you create those blue creatures inside the infected? You collect zombie cores to make these puppets evolve. Xiang Shuahai demanded angrily. In the apocalypse, humanity had suffered enough, yet there was someone treating human lives like test subjects. The man in black just shook his head slightly. You discovered that those blue spirits are still alive. Not bad. But unfortunately, I didn't create them. I don't have the qualifications to create such perfect beings. I merely nurture and spread them, and because of that, I have earned their approval. Those words only made Xiang Shuahai even more furious. The very thing that could lead to humanity's extinction was called a perfect being by him. You're absolute scum. Do you want to see this world destroyed just to satisfy yourself? The man in black shook his head. You don't understand. Your knowledge limits your imagination. We are not destroying the world. We are bringing about its rebirth. Hearing those words, I felt a sickening sense of familiarity. It sounded exactly like those madmen in movies who slaughtered the world in the name of their ideals. But that wasn't the main point. I caught a crucial detail in his words. You said we? Yes, we it. He smiled. I know you have a lot of questions. Go ahead and ask. I'm willing to answer, because I admire you very much. Originally, I planned to make you a part of me, but now I've changed my mind. Who exactly are you people? I asked in a deep voice. He chuckled. You killed Han Yuan and defeated Luo Xiaofeng, so you must have heard of the organization behind them. Now I'll tell you. That organization is called Genesis. Just one word, but his eyes were filled with yearning. It turned out he also belonged to that organization. This was the first time I had learned the name of this organization, but just hearing it was enough to feel the colossal ambition behind it. What puzzled me was how such an organization could grow this powerful in just 1 year after the apocalypse. Before I could ask, he continued, You're wondering how we managed to develop so quickly, right? Genesis existed before the apocalypse. In fact, we were born over half a century ago. That statement left me stunned. Over half a century? That was even longer than the history of many modern nations. This world isn't as simple as what you see. Genesis has always been a secret. Before the apocalypse, we already held immense power. Our members include financial tycoons and those who hold the core power of nations. They all stay hidden, so you had no idea. Take me, for example. He paused for a moment before continuing. I am the shareholder behind many multinational corporations. My ability didn't awaken after the apocalypse. I've had it since 10 years before the apocalypse even began. These words truly shocked me to the core. Paranormals existed before the apocalypse. This organization clearly far exceeded all my speculations. What exactly do you people know? I asked coldly. We know a lot of things. So much that you couldn't even imagine. For instance, we predicted the apocalypse 10 years ago. If we had more time, we would have prepared even more perfectly. I can tell you this. Genesis was born from a shocking discovery during a scientific expedition over half a century ago. It was that very discovery that led to the existence of this organization. The plague, those blue creatures, they all originated from the blue crystals we found during that expedition. It's just that back then, we couldn't activate the organisms inside. It wasn't until after the apocalypse, when our powers were enhanced, that those sealed blue spirits were gradually released. He looked straight at me, and I, possessing the strongest psychic power, was tasked with communicating with them. Those words completely overturned everyone's understanding of the world. The apocalypse was predicted in advance. Zhu Ying suddenly recalled that before the apocalypse broke out, there had been quite a few vague news reports. The government was rushing to build safe zones, and many wealthy and powerful people were evacuated early. At the time, no one thought deeply about it. But now it made sense. The first ones to know were Genesis. When a few people know, a secret is no longer a secret. Or perhaps Genesis intentionally let the news leak. But the time they left for the world was too short. Even the powerful elites couldn't all escape in time. You knew about the apocalypse in advance, yet you still let countless people die. Even if you have no mercy, you still need the lower classes to rule over, don't you? Why didn't you announce the news earlier so more people could survive, even if just to be your slaves? I asked. The man in black smiled faintly. We do not seek power or domination. We already had that power before the apocalypse. Those who cannot adapt to the new era should be eliminated. Jiang Lushi, human life harbors far more power than you think. Humans are not just a mass of chemical matter. Even though we set foot on the moon in the 60s. Even before the apocalypse, with all our scientific might, humanity still couldn't create life from nothing. We couldn't even create the simplest living bacterium. Technology could only synthesize viruses, which aren't even considered alive, or use bacteria as a template to create artificial DNA. But a bacterium itself is already a miracle, let alone the human body, which is exponentially more complex. The human brain is more sophisticated than any supercomputer. And yet, that entire body starts from a single tiny egg cell, developing from just a few thousand genes. This existence is so miraculous that you can't even fathom it. Humans possess such magnificent bodies, yet the vast majority live mediocre lives, doing mediocre jobs. Then they grow old, die, and are eventually sent to the crematorium to become ashes. That is truly a waste. Humans were originally meant to become gods. Jiang Lushir, don't you agree? Even though there are some in the organization who want to kill you. I, on the other hand, admire you greatly. Join us. Become a part of Genesis. You will be upgraded to an entirely new level of existence, becoming a god of this world. We will complete the evolution of humanity, striving for perfection. Perfect humans will be immortal, transcending even reincarnation. What? I was stunned. You want me to join Genesis? I truly didn't expect him to make such an offer. Captain Jiang, absolutely do not agree to their terms. Xiang Shuihai said hurriedly. She was someone who wanted to rebuild the post-apocalyptic order and restore the old way of life. To her, an organization like Genesis was an irreconcilable enemy. Logically, this kind of organization shouldn't have swayed me. But hearing about evolution and immortality, even I had to admit, it was a fatal temptation. If it were true, who wouldn't want to live forever? History had witnessed countless figures at the pinnacle of power madly pursuing immortality, from Qin Shi Huang and Emperor Wu of Han to Emperor Taizong of Tang and Wu Zetian. No one could escape that allure. I didn't answer immediately, silently pondering the man in black's words. According to him, Genesis was born from a scientific expedition. So what exactly did they discover that could gather so many powerful figures? A method to cultivate paranormal abilities? The blue fluid? Black holes? The apocalypse? All of these things completely overturned the old world. I found it hard to believe they were created by humans. Perhaps they came from extraterrestrials or from an extinct ancient civilization. I instinctively thought of the starseed, the very thing that had brought me to where I was today. But what exactly was the starseed? It was clearly the source of my power. Perhaps it was connected to Genesis, or maybe it was even their antithesis. These thoughts broadened my perspective on the apocalypse, but at the same time, they made everything more ambiguous and dangerous. Jiang Lushir, have you thought it through? The man in black said slowly. Currently, Genesis has 11 council members. If you join, you will become the 12th council member. He sounded incredibly confident, as if no one could possibly refuse such an offer. Eternal youth, limitless potential. The stronger one became, the harder it was to accept death. 11 council members, I said nonchalantly. So the core of Genesis only consisted of 11 people. At that exact moment, the MCV suddenly let out a deafening roar. A terrifying shockwave erupted, the vehicle's body shaking violently. A blast of compressed air, visible to the naked eye, shot straight toward the man in black at a speed far exceeding the speed of sound. The air was compressed to the point of liquefying the moisture, forming a distinct white cone. Air cannon. I didn't respond to his invitation at all. Instead, I directly ordered Ing to attack. Ignorant fool, the man in black shouted coldly. Instantly, a man over 2 meters tall lunged out to block in front of him. The giant roared, his entire body swelling, muscles bulging. The ground in front of him suddenly erupted into a stone wall nearly 3 meters high. Boom. The air cannon pulverized the stone wall into fragments, its residual force undiminished as it slammed straight into the giant's chest. He let out a groan as his body was sent flying backward, his ribs shattered, blood spraying from his mouth. If it were an ordinary person, they would have definitely died on the spot. However, despite being heavily injured, that man still struggled to stand up, his eyes brimming with a vicious light. His name is Zhang Shui, Xiang Shuihai said in a low voice, her eyes complex. He used to be my subordinate in Subei. When I left, he was already close to reaching level 2. I never expected him to join Shanghai and be turned into an infected. The subordinates she left behind had now all become tools in the hands of the man in black. Not only had they lost their humanity, but they had also grown noticeably stronger. This plague could enhance paranormals. Hearing his name, Zhang Shui trembled slightly, casting a brutal glare at Xiang Shuihai, but blood continued to seep from his chest. After that air cannon blast, no matter how strong his body was, his internal organs had suffered irreversible damage. Once the mental control weakened, he would undoubtedly die. At the same time, 7 or 8 infected behind him drew their weapons, ranging from Type 95 assault rifles to AKs, and opened fire like madmen. Get in the vehicle, I yelled. Zhu Ying and I could hold our own, but Shiyu and Yusin couldn't survive under such heavy firepower. Just then, a childish squeak rang out, and a pink fur ball darted straight into the hail of bullets. Luo! I panicked. Luo inflated in the blink of an eye, turning into a giant air cushion that blocked the entire barrage of bullets from the front. Bang! 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 The rifle bullet struck its body and bounced off, some even ricocheting right back. Two unlucky infected were shot in the head and collapsed on the spot. Luo, since when did you have this ability? I was astonished. I knew it was strong, but blocking bullets was truly beyond my data. Squeak! Squeak! Despite enduring a hail of bullets, Luo still squeaked happily upon hearing my voice. It was as if it was waiting to be praised. I could only smile bitterly. This was clearly not the time to joke around. It's probably the blue fluid that caused Luo to evolve, Yusin said quickly after retreating into the vehicle. That organism inherently has the ability to enhance paranormals. So it's not surprising that it got enhanced. Good job, Luo. Zhuiying laughed out loud. I'll reward you with an extra chicken leg tonight. With that, she charged straight out, her entire body enveloped in purple-blue lightning. 100,000 volts. The terrifying electric currents swept through the area like frenzied pythons, the blinding light like a sun exploding in broad daylight. The infected struck by the electricity were incinerated in an instant. But when the current reached the man in black, a sharp, cold screech rang out. A black disc appeared beneath his feet, lifting him into the air and evading the attack. I clenched my fists. The disc had no engine. It looked just like a block of alloy, yet it could fly. He's using his psychic power to lift it, Shiyu said urgently, and standing on it to fly. I was shocked. Psychic power could be used like this? He's not physically strong, Shiyu continued. He relies on controlling the infected and mental attacks. As long as we hit his real body, it's all over. You say I'm not strong? The man in black laughed loudly. I began evolving 10 years ago, consuming countless resources. You people have been on this path for less than a year. What makes you think you can fight me? He looked straight at me, his voice turning icy. Jiang Lushi, if you won't join Genesis, then become my puppet. The blue spirits I nurture have a progenitor. That progenitor has been nurtured by Genesis for over half a century and only awakened after the apocalypse. I've been looking for a suitable host, and you are the perfect choice. Your mechanical modification ability is absolutely ideal. You will become the ultimate host. A terrifying mental pressure crashed down. I felt as if my soul was being ripped from my body, completely losing control. This was his mental domain, a space where he could manipulate all the rules. Brother Jiang, I can't hold on much longer. Shiyu trembled, cold sweat dripping down her forehead. With only 1 year of evolution, she couldn't contend with his 10 years of accumulation. Right then, a sphere of blue light appeared before my eyes, as radiant as a star in the cosmos. Was that the progenitor of the plague? After the blue sphere of light appeared, the space around it instantly became distorted. Perhaps it wasn't the light being warped, but space-time itself twisting, making the sphere look like a portal to another dimension. Jiang Lushi, you will become my loyal subordinate, the most crucial piece for my ARC project. The man in black declared, and at that very moment, his entire body flared up like the sun. Amidst the blinding light, his hair stood on end, and a third eye seemed to appear between his brows. His psychic power surged down like a crashing ocean. Shiyu was the first to bear the brunt of it. She was struggling to use her own mental domain to resist, but her body suddenly convulsed violently. Her pupils dilated, her vision blurred completely, and a piercing ringing echoed in her ears. She let out a soft groan, her mind and body nearly torn apart. It was clear she could no longer withstand the man in black's mental domain. The entire Shi squad was enveloped in the terrifying psychic force field. Our thoughts felt locked by invisible chains. Our minds grew sluggish. Our bodies refused to obey, and we could only watch helplessly as everything unfolded before our eyes. You all have magnificent bodies. Become my subordinates. Starting with you. The man in black pointed straight at me. In his eyes, I was the core of the Shi squad, the prize he coveted most. As long as he controlled me, the soul of the entire squad would fall into his hands. With a wave of his hand, the blue sphere of light shot straight toward me. The moment the progenitor was about to invade my body, it seemed everything was already set in stone. Squeak, squeak, squeak. A piercing cry rang out. Luo suddenly leaped up, its chubby body aiming straight for the blue sphere of light. As a mutant beast, its mind was completely different from a human's. Even suppressed by the mental domain, it still retained some ability to act. It couldn't reach the man in black hovering in the air, so in the final moment, it chose to throw itself at the sphere instead. Luo, I panicked. Even though Luo could swallow the blue creatures, those were only low-level entities. The sphere before us was the progenitor of the plague, something I never thought Luo could handle. Extreme fear welled up in my heart, with only one thought. It's going to die. I don't need you. Get lost, the man in black roared, waving his hand. Boom. The ground beneath Luo exploded. A massive boulder was lifted into the air and hurled straight at it. His psychic power was beyond imagination. He could maintain his flight, sustain his mental domain, and still launch long-range attacks simultaneously. Bam! The boulder, weighing thousands of pounds, smashed heavily into Luo, squashing its body out of shape like a balloon. But with sheer tenacity, it bounced back, deflecting the boulder right back at the man in black. Oh, he was surprised, not expecting such explosive power hidden within that tiny body. But to him, it meant nothing. With just a single thought, the remaining core members of Shanghai attacked in unison. There were only 5 of them left, but each was incredibly powerful. After being infected, their strength far surpassed that of ordinary level 2 paranormals. With 5 of them attacking together, Luo was completely unable to defend itself. Bam! It was sent flying, crashing straight into the wall of a high-rise building. Rumble! A large section of the wall collapsed. Luo lay flat under the rubble, exhausted from the combined assault. Luo, my heart clenched, not knowing if it was still alive. You still have time to worry about your pet? Worry about yourself, the man in black roared. The blue sphere of light plunged straight toward my head. I poured all my strength into resisting, but against that overwhelming psychic force field, all my efforts were futile. Boom. The blue sphere of light slammed straight into my body. A blazing blue flame erupted, engulfing my entire body, as if I were being incinerated. Brother Jiang, Shiyu screamed in despair. Watching me get infected with her own eyes while being unable to do anything, that feeling of helplessness hurt her so much she wanted to collapse. In that moment, Shiyu bit down hard on her tongue. Blood filled her mouth, and the intense pain dragged her consciousness back. Her spirit flared up like a raging fire. Break! She poured out all her psychic power, screaming until her voice went hoarse. An invisible flame rose around her. It wasn't real fire, but the manifestation of her burning her own psychic power. Her hair whipped around, her gray eyes flashing brilliantly as she glared at the man in black in the air. What? For the first time, his expression changed. She's burning her psychic power? He never expected this girl's potential to explode to such a degree in a life-or-death moment. Boom. His mental domain was shattered in an instant. At that very moment, Zhuiying broke free from the mental shackles and saw me engulfed in blue flames. Her eyes turned bloodshot. Brother, from childhood to adulthood, I was Zhuiying's entire world. You must die. A frenzied killing intent erupted as fierce arcs of lightning burst from her entire body. She drew her blade. Blue lightning coiled around the blade like a python, emitting a terrifying crackling sound. Her body turned into a bolt of lightning, charging straight at the man in black. Boom. The blade thrust forward, lightning exploding and creating a terrifying wave of power. He waved his hand, releasing psychic power to push Zhuiying back, but she had entered a state of berserk fury, her electrical power erupting more and more intensely. The man in black was forced to take a few steps back, a flash of surprise in his eyes. Not bad, he said coldly, but still not enough. With a wave of his hand, surging psychic power blasted Zhuiying away. She fell, but immediately stood back up, her hand still tightly gripping the electrified blade, her eyes filled with hatred and resolve. I will absolutely never forgive anyone who dares to harm my brother. He sneered, raising his hand high, preparing to deliver the finishing blow. But right at that moment, a massive explosion rang out from behind. The space trembled, the surrounding buildings began to collapse, and a giant dark shadow appeared in the air. Luoluo. It had stood back up, its body growing much larger than before. It roared, lunging straight at the man in black. The lightning around Zhuiying merged with Luoluo's presence, forming a storm of power. He was flustered, not expecting Luoluo to still have the strength to fight, but it was too late to react. Luoluo slammed into him, and at the same time, Zhuiying erupted with electrical power, charging forward and giving him no chance to dodge. "Die!" she screamed, the electrified blade spinning as she thrust it straight at him. He was pushed back, his entire body submerged in the lightning and the terrifying impact from Luoluo. For the first time in his life, he felt weak and helpless. And more importantly, he realized he couldn't win this battle. As Zhuiying charged forward, the exploding electricity ionized the air. Even standing dozens of meters away, one could feel their hair stand on end from the terrifying electric field. The man in black was horrified, never expecting this girl to possess such immense potential. The power she unleashed now was many times stronger than before, a perfect combat body. And it also showed just how important I was to her. Zhuiying's blade seemed to tear through space-time as it slashed straight at him. He hurriedly spun around, leaning his body back as the flying disc beneath his feet flipped up, becoming a shield. Clang! The blade slashed heavily against the disc, leaving a deep gash. Electricity exploded across its surface, like lightning striking from the heavens. The blinding light dazzled everyone watching. A groan of pain from the man in black echoed from midair. The flying disc retrieved from the ruins was hard enough to block the blade, but it couldn't stop the electric current. Struck by the electricity, he staggered in midair, patches of scorch marks appearing on his exposed skin. His muscles convulsed violently, the pain so intense that even his facial expression twisted, every muscle in his face twitching uncontrollably. Very good. Very good. It's been a long time since I was last injured. The man in black quickly stabilized himself in midair, flying higher, his voice echoing down coldly. At the same time, chunks of concrete from the ground were lifted into the air, swirling around him as if controlled by an invisible force. I saw Rin Shiyu's pupils shrink slightly. Previously, she had assumed the man in black's physical body wasn't strong, but right now, he had clearly exceeded her expectations. Having been a paranormal for 10 years and being one of the 11 council members of Genesis, his body had been tempered countless times. It was only natural for him to be this formidable. Very good. I am extremely satisfied with your potential. The man in black looked toward Jiang Zhuiying, his eyes full of greed. She was too strong, so strong that she nearly made him capsize. From this moment on, he had to raise his guard against Zhuiying. He wanted to control everyone, from Zhuiying to the other girls, including me. Only then could we become tools to unleash his full power. You think just because you fly high, I can't do anything to you? Zhuiying, let me send you up there. Xiang Shuahai shouted. Immediately after, a powerful gust of wind erupted around her, wrapping around Jiang Zhuiying, lifting her off the ground, and launching her straight into the air. Controlling the wind with all her might consumed a massive amount of Xiang Shuahai's energy, but in this situation, Zhuiying was clearly the biggest threat to the man in black. Sending her into midair was the most logical choice. Jiang Zhuiying soared high, her entire body radiating blinding electricity like a goddess of thunder, her eyes glowing with a cold blue electric light. The electricity in her hands continuously gathered, rapidly weaving into a giant electric net that spread out before her, almost covering the entire sky. The man in black stood in midair, clearly feeling waves of piercing pain as the electric arcs penetrated his skin. Faced with the perfect coordination between Xiang Shuahai's wind ability and Jiang Zhuiying's electricity, he had almost no way out. However, at this moment, he didn't panic at all. Instead, he flashed an eerie smile. Don't you love your brother very much? Then let's see if you dare to attack him. As soon as those words were spoken, Rin Shiyu instantly felt uneasy. Brother Jiang. She reacted in a split second. Her psychic power burned fiercely, erecting a mental shield around me. But earlier, forcibly shattering the man in black's mental force field had consumed too much of her energy. Her face was deathly pale. This forced effort was pushing her past her limits. Her body swayed slightly, a hoarse groan escaping her throat, and fresh blood dripped from her pale hands. Haha, you can't stop me. The man in black roared, his psychic power surging like a pitch-black flood, rushing straight toward me in the blink of an eye. The moment that flood hit, Rin Shiyu's mental shield shattered into pieces. Her body trembled, her vision blurring. But what hurt her the most wasn't physical pain, but the pain in her heart. At this moment, the man in black firmly believed victory was in his grasp. The explosive potential of Jiang Zhuiying and the strength of the others made him unwilling to drag things out. He decided to end it quickly. As long as he controlled me, the core of the group, everything else would crumble. Jiang Lucier has already been infected by the progenitor of the blue spirit. Once I control him, he will become my strongest assistant, he declared, brimming with confidence. Those infected by the progenitor inherently lost the ability to resist mentally. And since so much time had passed, logically speaking, I should have been completely infected. But the moment his psychic power invaded my brain, his expression suddenly changed. My mind was like a bottomless whirlpool, instantly sucking all his psychic power inside. He looked at me in horror. Blue spots had already appeared on my skin, my eyes were dyed a cold blue, and the energy radiating from my body was incredibly intense. These were all clear signs of being infected by the progenitor. But why couldn't he control me? Not only that, but a terrifying suction force erupted from that mental whirlpool, continuously dragging his psychic power inside. He realized in panic that it was no different from a quagmire, dragging him down and frantically devouring all his psychic power. While my eyes were already filled with ruthlessness, my consciousness hadn't completely vanished. I was like standing on the fragile boundary between human and infected, a state the man in black had never seen before. He could clearly sense the blue spirit's progenitor moving violently through my veins. In theory, the progenitor would invade the brain. Once it seized control, I would become a mindless vessel, incapable of resistance. However, as the progenitor approached my brain, it encountered an impenetrable barrier. That was exactly what had kept me conscious up to this moment. And right then, a low, hoarse growl tore from my throat, sounding exactly like a wild beast pushed to the brink. What exactly is going on? The man in black clearly sensed the changes in my body, his voice unable to hide his astonishment. The plague's progenitor was clearly present in my brain. His psychic power could sense it very distinctly. But it seemed there was an even more powerful energy entity inside my brain. The very existence of that energy made my brain like an impenetrable fortress, impossible to invade. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. The blue light on my body grew brighter and brighter. The man in black felt it clearly. The plague's progenitor was fiercely battling the mysterious energy source in my brain, but it was ultimately being pushed back bit by bit. And then, something he completely didn't expect happened. The members of Shanghai he had previously controlled, those infected by the plague, suddenly started going mad. A level 2 paranormal roared, throwing a straight punch into his comrade's chest, caving it in and causing blood to spray from his mouth. Immediately after, he grabbed a broken steel bar from the ground and stabbed it straight into the back of the blood-vomiting man's head. Witnessing this scene, the man in black's face turned incredibly ugly. A problem with the progenitor had caused the infected paranormals to completely lose control. Right at this moment, he suddenly sensed an intense, life-threatening danger. He turned his head and saw that my MCV had started up. The entire vehicle radiated a black light, the surrounding space seemingly distorted under the influence of that energy source. His heart pounded. He was all too familiar with this type of energy, black hole energy. Over half a century ago, during a scientific expedition, they had discovered a small black hole containing a mysterious energy source. The Genesis organization had researched it for decades and still couldn't fully understand it. Until the apocalypse struck, a massive black hole appeared in Huaxia and fell into my hands. Right now, the energy emitting from the MCV was precisely black hole energy. Could it be that I had installed the black hole into the MCV, combining it with my mechanical modification ability? Just thinking about that was enough to make him realize he had underestimated me. Thud. I landed heavily on the roof of the MCV, my body still burning in blue flames. It seemed I couldn't fully control myself yet. My eyes were brimming with ferocity, no longer resembling those of a normal person. Virum, Virum. The MCV roared fiercely, the blue flames on my body being sucked in by the black hole. It was drawn toward the vehicle, making the entire MCV tremble like a giant dragon awakening. Using the power of the black hole to absorb the plague's progenitor, the man in black was in complete panic. Even though I had been infected by the progenitor, thanks to the protection of the mysterious energy, my brain hadn't been invaded. And then, I used the black hole to suck the progenitor out. Once completely sucked out, it was highly likely the progenitor would be devoured by the black hole. What the outcome would be after that, even he didn't dare to imagine. But it certainly wasn't what he wanted. You want to devour the plague's progenitor? In your dreams, he roared, forcibly summoning his mental force field once again. In truth, opening the mental force field at this moment was incredibly difficult for him. His psychic power was severely depleted, and the continuous outbursts had exhausted his brain. Moreover, his force field had just been shattered by Ren Xiyu. Even though her psychic power wasn't even a tenth of his, when she burned it regardless of the consequences. The explosive power in that instant was stronger than his, enough to cause mental trauma. And it didn't stop there. Jiang Zhuiying's lightning strike had also electrocuted his body. He didn't want to drag this out any longer. As a psychic paranormal, his body was much weaker than others of the same level. A single misstep could leave him with irreversible injuries. He had to end this right now. The massive mental force field enveloped the entire space, its sole target being me. Hidden within it was an extremely powerful mental attack, enough to severely injure me, or even knock me unconscious. But to him, that was still better than letting me escape. However, right at this moment, my MCV let out an earth-shattering roar. A massive cannon extended from the front of the vehicle. This was originally the air cannon, but what it fired was a black light. In the air, the black energy rapidly condensed into countless tiny particles, converging toward the barrel. At the same time, the blue flames on my body were sucked straight into it. The moment the mental force field was about to envelop the MCV, the cannon roared, firing a pitch-black pillar of energy. As soon as the energy pillar appeared, it seemed to become the only existence between heaven and earth, eclipsing even the sun. On the surface of the black energy pillar, streams of blue energy coiled around it, intertwining like a network of veins. The two powers merged, directly tearing through the man in black's mental force field. Then, without slowing down, the energy pillar shot straight toward his chest. What? He was horrified, hastily controlling the flying disc beneath his feet to dodge to the side. But in that instant, a terrifying suction force gripped him tightly, rendering his entire body unable to move an inch. For the first time since joining Genesis, he clearly tasted the flavor of death. He bit down hard on his tongue to stay awake, erupting with all his remaining strength. The energy pillar tore through the sky. Even though he had given his all to dodge, he couldn't escape completely. His right arm and right shoulder were blown away, turning into a mist of blood. A beat of emptiness, and then agonizing pain crashed over him like a tidal wave, cold sweat pouring down in buckets. He stared in disbelief at the gaping hole on his right side. From the shoulder down, there was only a mangled mess of flesh and blood, like a cruel joke played by the Grim Reaper. His ears rang, his mind spinning. He had become a cripple. Even though Genesis possessed technology far beyond current humanity, most of it was still incomplete. Regenerating a lost limb was impossible. From now on, he only had one arm left. Jiang Lushi, I'll kill you. He roared like a madman, but immediately after, a chilling, killing intent swept over him. An electric field enveloped him, forcing him to whip around. Behind him, Jiang Zhuiying stood amidst the gale, supported by Xiang Shuihai's wind ability, her eyes as cold as steel. Die! The electrified long blade tore through space, thrusting straight for his heart. The distance was too close, he couldn't dodge. In that life-or-death moment, he screamed, grabbing the blade with just his left arm, his psychic power crashing down to control it. But the electricity coating the blade completely blocked his psychic power. The blade pierced his chest, but due to the resistance, it hadn't pierced his heart yet. Instantly, Zhu Ying tightened her grip on the chain attached to the blade, and all her electrical energy erupted. Lightning tore through the air, ionizing everything. His body was submerged in a sea of light. An ordinary person struck by electricity wouldn't be able to let go of the conductor, but with his twisted willpower, he managed to yank the blade out and hurl it back at Zhu Ying. Zhu Ying's strength was depleted. That last burst of electricity was everything she had. Her eyes widened as she watched the blade hurtle toward her. With no electricity left to protect her, his psychic power had accelerated the blade. Zhu Ying only had time to brace her arms to block. She didn't want to die. She couldn't leave her brother. Right as the blade was about to touch her arms, a chubby figure threw itself in front of her. Luoluo. Zhu Ying's heart clenched. Luoluo had an incredibly resilient body, nearly impossible to pierce. The blade was tightly entangled by its soft body. Damn it, he roared in despair. If he were still at his peak, a single mental strike would have been enough to pierce through this monster. But now his psychic power was drained. He didn't even have the strength to pull the blade back. Swish! A chill ran down his spine. He whipped around. A girl in black appeared behind him like a ghost. A dagger aimed straight for his Achilles tendon. Zero. She had also been lifted by Xiang Shuai's wind, darting right behind him. In midair, Zero spun nimbly. She didn't need to hit a fatal spot. Just landing a strike like a cat toying with its prey was enough to finish him. The closest target was his legs. The strike was too fast, too sudden. His Achilles tendon was severed. He lost an arm, and now he lost a leg. In a fit of rage, he glared at Zero, pouring out the last of his psychic power to stab straight into her brain, wanting to turn her into an idiot. But right at that moment, bang! A gunshot rang out. A sniper bullet pierced straight through the center of his forehead, blood spraying in midair. The bullet from the AMR-2 struck the man in black, his body thrown upward. Normally, getting hit in the head by a sniper bullet would cause the head to explode, but his head remained intact. It was just that the bullet still penetrated his brain, causing his eyes to instantly glaze over. Immediately after, Zhu Ying's blade and Zero's dagger pierced his body almost simultaneously. The blade slashed across his throat, while the dagger plunged straight into his heart from behind. The light in his eyes completely faded, his life force dissipating. It seemed that in his final moment, he still tried to turn his head to look at me, but his pupils had lost all focus, unable to see anything anymore. He never thought that, with his status as a member of the Genesis organization, he would die in a place like this. When his body fell heavily to the ground, his clothes were scorched black by electricity, his entire body drenched in blood. It was a death pathetic to the extreme. At this point, Zhu Ying no longer cared about that corpse. The moment she touched the ground, she rushed toward me, ignoring her exhausted body. I was kneeling on the roof of the MCV, gripping the AMR, my face twisted in pain and ferocity. Zhu Ying, be careful. Shiyu called out a warning. The battle just now had nearly drained all her strength. Her body had suffered severe trauma, and her face was pale, but she still forced herself to speak up and warn her. Sister Shiyu, you mean? Zhu Ying turned to look, her expression instantly changing as a terrible possibility surfaced in her mind. You mean my brother has been infected? She didn't dare imagine the consequences if I truly became an infected. I'm not sure. Shiyu panted, every word seeming to drain the last bit of her strength. His mind is very unstable, full of violence. Just then, a piercing crack rang out. Everyone looked toward me in unison, only to see me snap the AMR-2 in my hands in half, before my entire body rolled off the roof of the MCV. A super-hard alloy sniper rifle snapped in half barehanded, its parts scattering everywhere. Zhu Ying was stunned. Before, my strengths lay only in vehicle modification, brain evolution, and marksmanship. My body was slightly more agile than an ordinary person's, but compared to a level 2 paranormal, I was still far behind. Yet now, I could snap an AMR-2 barehanded, something even a strength-type paranormal might not be able to do. This was clearly the power brought by the plague's progenitor. I had been affected, but if it weren't for me, they probably all would have died. Zhu Ying ignored the warning and stepped forward until she was only about 5 meters away from me. Your brother isn't like them, she said, her eyes resolute. Even though my eyes were filled with tyranny, she still believed I wouldn't attack her. Or maybe she was just too worried about me. She didn't care about anything else anymore. Everyone watched me nervously. I was like a wild beast that could go berserk at any moment. Shiyu, do you have any ideas? Shuai asked. The only person who could communicate with me right now was Shiyu, but she was heavily injured, her mental energy barely able to project outward. Shiyu shook her head helplessly. Let me try. Uxian stepped down from the base vehicle. The distance between her and me was very close. Uxian, Shuai called out anxiously. Even though they were romantic rivals, she still didn't want Uxian to be in danger. I'm fine. Brother Jiang was able to attack the people from Shanghai, which proves he still has his reason. Since Shiyu can't use her mental energy, let me try. I'm a doctor, after all, and I have healing mental energy. I can be considered a mental-type psychic too. Uxian slowly approached, reaching out to gently touch me. The air seemed to freeze. Everyone held their breath. Zero had gotten out of the vehicle and stood next to Zhu Ying, ready to strike from behind if I lost control. Brother Jiang, it's me, Uxian, she said softly, carefully placing her hand on mine. Unlike Shiyu, who could connect mentally from a distance, Uxian needed direct physical contact. She quietly sensed my brain, something that even a CT, X-ray, or MRI couldn't see. I remained silent, my inner consciousness constantly struggling, but I didn't attack Uxian. Brother John's condition is very complicated. Uxian spoke up, observing as she explained. I've studied these liquid organisms before. They usually invade and take over the host's brain, controlling the forebrain before spreading throughout the body. But he's different. It seems there's a layer of energy wrapping around his brain, protecting it tightly. The plague mother body is strong, but it can't penetrate his brain. It can only stop at the nervous system, trying to control his body through the spinal and peripheral nerves. Uxian's mental observation skills were incredibly sharp. She found the problem almost instantly, something that would be nearly impossible in a normal hospital. Zero remained silent. Uxian didn't know what that energy layer was, but he knew very well. It was the star seed. Because the star seed occupied my brain, it didn't allow any other organism to invade. Thanks to that, Ing wasn't too worried about my condition. I can try to remove the mother body, but the chances of success are low. If given enough time, it could break through his brain's defenses, or simply use his spinal and peripheral nerves to control his entire body. Uxian spoke bluntly. In theory, as long as it controlled the nervous system, the plague mother body could dictate my every move. Even if my thoughts were still my own, my body would no longer belong to me. Removing the mother body without harming me was extremely difficult. Not to mention, during the process, Uxian also risked getting infected, but at this point, she didn't care. Uxian, don't rush. Do you see the blue energy flowing in Brother Zhang's body being absorbed by the base vehicle? Maybe the vehicle can absorb the plague mother body, Shiyu said weakly. Despite her severe injuries, her mental energy still allowed her to observe very closely. Use the base vehicle to absorb the mother body? But how do we operate it? Uxian asked. Normally, only I and Ing could drive the vehicle. She looked over at Ing. Maybe Brother Jiang doesn't need our treatment. Ing shook her head. Zhu Ying was stunned. Why? He can handle it himself. How do you know? Just a feeling. Ying's voice was very serious, without a hint of hesitation. What good is a feeling? This is the plague mother body. What if something happens to Captain Jiang? Shuai disagreed. At a time like this, no one dared to gamble with my life, nor could anyone be sure what the outcome would be. Only Ying dared to draw a conclusion based on her intuition. What she didn't expect was that Zhu Ying, the one most worried about me, fell silent for a moment and then said, I trust Ying. Zhu Ying. Shuai was shocked. Shiyu and Zero also hesitated for a moment, but didn't object. Even Uxian nodded. Ying had always been very mysterious. No one in the group truly knew her background. But since Ying and I never tried to hide it, everyone had silently guessed that there was a special connection between us. We could communicate without going through Shiyu, which was completely different from the mental communication of psychics. Moreover, only Ying and I could drive the base vehicle. Anyone else who sat in the driver's seat couldn't even start it. Perhaps the person who understood me best was Ying, the one who always drove in silence, working nonstop. sometimes even going 24 hours without rest. Shiyu, Uxian, maybe Brother Jiang still needs your care. He's not in immediate danger, but if he can't control his body for a long time, the plague mother body could still damage his nervous system. Ying added, I'll take care of Brother Jiang. So what do we do next? Uxian asked. Until now, every decision had been made by me. Now that I couldn't lead, she felt at a loss. First, we sweep the Shanghai base. They've collected a lot of zombie crystals to feed the infected hosts. There's definitely a lot of valuable stuff left. Take it all. Don't leave them a single thing, Zhu Ying said through gritted teeth. These Shanghai bastards are the reason he got infected. I'm sorry. If I hadn't mentioned the plague in Subei, Captain Zheng wouldn't have been dragged into this, Shuai said, her voice full of remorse. Sister Shuai, don't blame yourself. This has nothing to do with you. My brother had already decided to pass through the Shanghai safe zone from the very beginning. Subei and Jinling are unavoidable stops on the way. Even without you, we still would have clashed with Shanghai. Besides, they targeted us first. That guy was dead set on capturing my brother. Even if we hadn't come here, they would have found us. Even though Zhu Ying's heart was aching with worry over my condition, she didn't blame Shuai at all. In fact, if Shuai's wind ability hadn't lifted Zhu Ying and Zero into the air during the final battle, the outcome today might have been completely different. It was Shuai who had helped me, which made Zhu Ying like her a lot more. Yeah. Thank you, Zhu Ying, Shuai said softly, her tone softening. She didn't know when it happened, but she truly felt like she belonged in this group. Oh, right, Sister Shuai, what are your plans now? Zhu Ying asked, her eyes lighting up. Initially, both sides thought they were just traveling together temporarily, and that Shuai would return to Subei to continue building her own safe zone. But now, her team in Subei had been brought to Jinling and fallen into Shanghai's hands, all dying right here. In just one night, she had lost her entire foundation. I don't know either. My people are all gone, Shuai sighed, her voice heavy. Then, Sister Shuai, why don't you just stay with us? Zhu Ying said, glancing at Uxian and Shiyu, her tone growing more intimate. Shuai bit her lip. Honestly, she really wanted to stay. Spending these past few days with this group, she felt safe and comfortable. She experienced a rare, genuine care in this apocalyptic world full of suspicion. The girls in the group alone made her reluctant to leave, let alone the fact that I was here too. Thinking of that, her face flushed slightly. But she was also worried, unsure if everyone would truly accept her. Actually, while Shuai was still hesitating, Shiyu suddenly spoke up, her voice weak. Sister Shuai, you should stay. Your ability is very important. If it weren't for you today, Brother Jiang might have. At this moment, Shiyu wasn't thinking about romance at all. Her only concern was my safety. In the future, who knew how many enemies with flying abilities would appear? If they couldn't hit the enemy, they would just be sitting ducks. With Shuai here, that problem was no longer terrifying. Sister Shuai, if you want to just stay. It's really fun on our vehicle. Plus, calling you Sister Shuai sounds a bit distant. How about Xiaoxiang or Xiangxiang? Uxian said with a smile. She knew exactly what Shuai was worried about. After today's battle, Uxian no longer opposed Shuai staying. In the apocalypse, the most important thing was survival. One more person meant one more source of strength, and there was no turning back from our feud with the Dawn organization. Let's go to the Shanghai base. Tonight we celebrate Sister Shuai joining the team, Zhu Ying said cheerfully. Now, our team had aerial combat capabilities, on sea and on land, plus Luoluo evolving into an almost invincible shield. Everything was becoming more complete. The only thing was, when would I wake up? Without me, everything seemed to lose its meaning. Zhu Ying shook her head, refusing to think about it anymore. She believed Ying's words. I would recover, it was just a matter of time. Virum. The base vehicle's engine roared as it headed straight for the Shanghai base. Ever since I was infected by the plague mother body, the star seed had been protecting my brain. I had managed to hold on to my last shred of sanity to kill the man in black, but after that, I completely lost control. My consciousness collapsed, and I fell into a coma. According to Uxian's conclusion after examining me, this was very likely a self-defense mechanism of the brain. I lay motionless on the large bed in the base vehicle's master bedroom, my face as pale as paper. My sleep was anything but peaceful. My brows were constantly furrowed, my facial muscles twitching as if I were enduring some horrific pain. Seeing me like this, Uxin was both worried and heartbroken. Shiyu, how are you? Feeling any better? Uxin asked. Both of them were mental-type psychics. She knew very well that mental trauma couldn't heal in a day or two. In the recent battle, besides me, the one who suffered the heaviest injuries was Shiyu. Shiyu shook her head. I'm okay. I should recover in a few days. When I do, I'll try to connect with Brother Zhang's consciousness. Shiyu sighed softly, her voice weak. If I were just a little stronger, maybe things wouldn't have come to this. Right then, Zhu Ying's voice rang out. We've arrived at the Shanghai base. Everyone originally thought they would have to fight another battle to subdue the guards upon arrival, but the reality was completely different. Almost all the guards were dead. Several corpses were tangled together, clearly having killed each other in a frenzy of lost control. Zhu Ying shook her head. This is definitely the aftermath of the plague. The man in black was dead, and the mother body couldn't control me, causing the infected hosts to go mad all at once. Without the mastermind behind the scenes, the Shanghai he had built collapsed with him. Zhu Ying jumped out of the base vehicle. The Shanghai base was huge, but there was no one left alive to interrogate. If the warehouse was underground, searching for it would be very difficult. She turned to Uxin. Sister Uxin, let Luo out. Uxin was slightly surprised but immediately understood, smiling as she released Luo. It puffed up its body, floating like a small balloon, and flew around the base, its little nose sniffing continuously. Very quickly, Luo flew straight to a thick, heavy metal door, licking its lips and pointing at it with its claws. Here, Zhu Ying asked. Squeak, squeak. Luo chirped excitedly, exactly like a puppy smelling food. This door is really thick. Zhu Ying rubbed her chin, then handed the job over to Ying. The base vehicle switched to mining truck mode and rammed straight into the door and wall. Crash. The reinforced concrete collapsed. The vehicle immediately transformed back into a bus, the spikes on its front tearing through the remaining steel mesh inside. The scene inside the warehouse was revealed. It was a massive storage space, like a secret laboratory, with rows of long tables covered in equipment. On one table, inside an open refrigerator, was a container of blue liquid organisms. These liquid organisms were clearly of a higher quality than those taken from normal infected hosts. Even if they weren't on par with the mother body, they were still much stronger. Squeak, squeak. Luo was thrilled, almost lunging at it, but turned its head to look at Zhu Ying, waiting for permission. Zhu Ying laughed and rubbed its head. You really are a glutton. These things have a lot of energy. Eat slowly, don't eat it all. Sister Uxin still needs some for research. She hoped Uxin could find clues to help me recover faster. Given permission, Luo immediately dove in and started eating ravenously. Zhu Ying shifted her attention to a safe in the corner of the wall. For her, opening it was a piece of cake. A blade of electricity slashed down, and the safe burst open. When she saw what was inside, she took a deep breath. Dozens of mutant crystals, at least 60 or 70 of them. She knew the man in black's goal in building Shanghai was to collect crystals, but this amount still far exceeded her imagination. Even many large safe zones might not have accumulated this much. She gathered them all up to take away. There were also some documents in the warehouse that caught Zhu Ying's special attention. They contained extensive records on the liquid organisms, the plague mother body, and specifically mentioned a weapon. Her eyes lit up. I had come to Shanghai precisely to find this weapon, but until now, it was still unclear what it was. Zhu Ying brought the documents back to the vehicle to read carefully, but the more she read, the more disappointed she became. The documents didn't describe the weapon in detail. They only specified the location of its next appearance, and it wasn't in Shanghai. It was in Japan. Overseas, Zhu Ying froze. She remembered my previous speculation. Shanghai might just be a gathering point for the Dawn organization, not the place where the weapon was stored. If so, it was very likely they planned to assemble at Shanghai and then head straight to Japan from the airport or port. In the bedroom, I lay on the large bed, my brows tightly furrowed, as if trapped in an endless nightmare. Zhu Ying stood beside me, watching me in my coma. She stroked my cheek and then handed a mutant crystal core to Ing. Ing carefully placed the crystal on the center of my forehead. Immediately, a strange phenomenon occurred. The crystal core began to melt like heated gummy candy, slowly merging into my forehead as the energy inside was gradually absorbed. About 20 minutes later, the energy was depleted. The crystal lost its glow and crumbled into fine powder. Ing proceeded to place the second crystal core on my forehead. This time, the process was faster, taking just over 15 minutes to absorb. Just like that, mutant crystal cores were placed on me one by one, each taking about 15 minutes. If any other team saw this speed, their hearts would surely bleed for the cost. But for Zhu Ying's team, nothing was more important than me waking up. No amount of crystals could compare to my life. In just 2 hours, over 10 crystals had turned to dust. Brother Jiang is changing, Yuxian said, her voice unable to hide her joy. She had been observing from the start, but she had to confirm it multiple times before she dared to speak up. Even though she didn't know about the star seed in my brain, nor could she be sure if it was me or the plague mother body absorbing the energy, she was certain that all the changes were positive. My heartbeat slowed down but grew stronger, each beat like a drum. My breathing became steadier, the cells in my body were being fortified, and some were even differentiating further. Yuxian also saw a system of blue-purple energy branches slowly appearing in my body, intertwining into a network. She thought to herself, could these be the legendary meridians? Where essence is the body, spirit is the soul, and chi is the invisible energy. She used to think that was just folklore, but now that mental energy had been proven real, and seeing me transform like this, she realized that life on Earth was far more complex. My changes caught the attention of everyone in the vehicle, including Shuai. Everyone was both anxious and hopeful that I was undergoing an evolution far beyond that of a normal psychic. When Ing placed the 16th crystal on my forehead, my body began to tremble violently, as if enduring immense pain. Brother Jiang, the girls cried out in unison, filled with worry. No one knew what would happen next. Only Ing maintained her composure. She continued placing crystals on my forehead, ignoring my convulsing body, my tensed muscles, and the blood vessels bulging on my forehead like crawling earthworms. A few minutes later, as the 16th crystal was absorbed, my skin turned bright red, and sweat poured from my pores. Zhu Ying touched my forehead and quickly pulled her hand back, crying out from the burning heat. My temperature was so high it burned to the touch, probably reaching 40 or 50 degrees Celsius. Is something wrong? Shuai asked anxiously, but Ing didn't answer, her eyes solely focused on me. When the 16th crystal turned to ash, she placed the 17th. My body was as red as a boiled lobster, oozing a mixture of sweat and blood. Shuai covered her mouth. Yet Ing still placed the 18th crystal. Everyone held their breath. My body shook uncontrollably. The blood vessels on my forehead and arms were so taut they looked ready to burst. From my pores, not only sweat and blood, but also a foul-smelling, dark gray grime began to seep out. At this moment, no one cared about the stench. They were entirely focused on my well-being. Suddenly, my body gave a violent jolt and then completely settled down, falling into a deep sleep. This time, my brows were no longer furrowed, my face no longer showed pain. I looked like I was sleeping very peacefully. Ing breathed a sigh of relief and finally stopped. She wiped the sweat from her forehead, seemingly having exhausted a great deal of energy. Shuai didn't understand why Ing would be so exhausted just from placing a few crystals. She had no idea that throughout the entire process, Ing had been using her mental energy to connect with the star seed, monitoring every minute change in my body. Doing so took a heavy toll on her, as she wasn't a mental-type psychic. Brother Jiang is fine for now, but he'll have to sleep for a very long time. I need to rest, Ing said, her face slightly pale, before leaving the room. The girls stood there looking at each other. I lay there, my entire body covered in a layer of dried, dark gray grime that gave off a terrible stench. Someone thought to themselves, perhaps this is the legendary marrow cleansing process. Initially, they were worried about me, but now that everything had stabilized, a few of them started to find the stench unbearable. If I were in a coma for a few weeks, my body would definitely get so filthy that the stench would permeate the entire room. I was oblivious to this, but Li Yusin grabbed a towel and tried to wipe me down. However, my clothes were soaked with sweat and blood, and underneath, I was so dirty that wiping was practically useless. She coughed softly and shyly suggested that maybe I needed a bath. The moment the words left her mouth, everyone froze. Because bathing a grown man with absolutely nothing to cover him up was just too embarrassing. Li Yusin suggested Zhu Ying do it since she was my younger sister, but Zhu Ying's eyes widened in protest, saying that since I was her brother, it was even more inappropriate. The two argued back and forth. Mentioning how I used to bathe with Zhu Ying when we were kids made her face turn beet red. Back then, we had lost our parents early and relied on each other to survive, until I firmly refused to let her bathe with me anymore. Zhu Ying shyly told Li Yusin that since she was a doctor and my nurse, she should be the one to do it. Then she smiled mischievously, adding that this was a great opportunity for her to take advantage of me. This embarrassed Li Yusin so much that she dragged Shiyu into it, saying Shiyu was the most meticulous and therefore more suitable. Shiyu blushed and refused, saying she was still too weak and didn't have the strength. Right then, Xiang Shuahai casually chimed in that if no one else would do it, she would bathe me herself. She even added that she could use her wind ability to blow me dry. Her calm words left everyone stunned. I couldn't see it, but Li Yusin definitely couldn't sit still. Her mind must have conjured up all sorts of unacceptable scenarios. So she quickly took on the responsibility of bathing me in her capacity as a nurse. But Xiang Shuahai still wouldn't back down, insisting she would scrub every pore clean. Finally, under their urging gazes, she reluctantly agreed to join in and use her mental energy to monitor my body. Meanwhile, Xiang Shuahai blinked and smiled, suggesting, "Why don't the three of us do it together?" I don't know what they were thinking, but Zhu Ying stood to the side, giggling mischievously for a while before she couldn't handle the bluntness anymore. She excused herself, leaving them to deal with me in the bathroom. Zhu Ying hurriedly grabbed her iPad and left the room, leaving only Shuahai, Yu Xian, Shiyu, and my comatose self behind. While Yu Xian and Shiyu were still awkwardly figuring out where to start, Shuahai took the initiative to unbutton my shirt. From my shirt to my pants, everything was so dirty it practically had to be thrown away. In the post-apocalyptic world, there was no shortage of clothes. As long as you had the skills to get past the zombies, you could take whatever you wanted. For Zhu Ying's team, that was never an issue. Yu Xian and Shiyu hesitated, but ultimately let Shuahai do it, because neither of them could actually bring themselves to undress me. Despite her calm demeanor, Shuahai's fingers still trembled slightly when she actually did it. She was clearly nervous too. Once I was undressed, she threw the clothes out the window, told Shiyu to run the hot water, and then used her wind ability to gently float me into the bathtub. Shuahai held the bath towel and scrubbed very carefully from my arms and torso down to my thighs. But every time her gaze swept over my sensitive areas, her hand would tremble slightly. Shiyu stood by the tub, her face flushed red, her mind completely blank. Yu Xian watched for a moment, and refusing to be outdone, also grabbed a towel to help. Throughout the whole process, the heartbeats and breathing of all three girls were as erratic as if they were fighting a war. In the end, no one dared to touch my sensitive areas. Fortunately, soaking in the water for a long time was enough to clean them somewhat. When they were almost done, Shiyu hurriedly left the bathroom, while Yu Xian stayed behind to dry me off and change my clothes, not feeling comfortable leaving Shuahai alone with me. Ying had said earlier that I had absorbed 18 mutant crystals in a row, which was the limit my body could handle. It would take about a day or two to digest the energy, meaning I would have to absorb more every 2 or 3 days. Hearing this, Yu Xian was surprised, realizing that every time I did, I would need another bath because of the grime I expelled. Shiyu nodded in confirmation, while Shuahai didn't seem bothered at all. In fact, she looked visibly pleased. Yu Xian immediately suggested splitting into groups. Next time it would be her and Shuahai, the time after that her and Shiyu. She firmly stated that as the nurse, she would be present every time. The following days went exactly as predicted. Every 60 hours or so, Ying would bring crystals for me to absorb. The first time was 18 crystals. The subsequent times were about 12 crystals. And every time it was over, I had to be bathed because of the grime I expelled. Over time, the amount of grime decreased. My skin became as smooth as a baby's, and my muscles were defined but not overly bulky, looking like an exquisite work of art. Even Shiyu couldn't help but stare a little longer when bathing me, while Uxian suddenly noticed that I seemed to have grown a few centimeters taller. My physique was sturdier, and though my face hadn't changed, my aura had become noticeably more imposing. Looking at me like this, her heart skipped a beat, because what had kept her tethered to me all this time was never my appearance. It was who I was, the person who had gradually become the most important part of her life. Now, even my appearance and physique had become so perfect that Uxian started to worry more people would fall for me. This made her feel insecure. Seeing Uxian pause, Shiyu asked why she wasn't continuing the bath. Uxian snapped out of it, replied that she was still working on it, and leaned down to wipe my body, as careful as if she were tending to a precious work of art. When she reached my sensitive areas, she bit her lip in hesitation for a second, but continued anyway, knowing full well that if she didn't clean them, it could easily lead to health issues. Watching her actions, Shiyu's face burned red. She was both embarrassed and uncontrollably curious about what it felt like to touch there. Just as that thought crossed her mind, she noticed my body having a physiological reaction, leaving both of them stunned. A reaction even while in a deep coma? This sent Uxian into a panic. Because normally, someone in a deep coma couldn't react unless they could vaguely sense something. She held her breath, watching me, and saw my eyelashes flutter. Then, I slowly opened my eyes, causing her to let out a small gasp, her face flushing all the way down to her neck. The moment I woke up should have been what she was looking forward to the most, yet right now, it only threw her into complete disarray. Because she was doing something incredibly embarrassing, and not only Shiyu, but I had seen it too. Her mind went blank, filled only with the fear that I would think she was taking advantage of me while I was comatose. Shiyu, standing nearby, was equally panicked. Even though she wasn't directly bathing me, holding a towel by the tub made her feel like an accomplice. She didn't even know if she'd ever dare to look me in the eye again. I opened my eyes in a half-awake, half-asleep state. The light was so blinding I had to squint, vaguely realizing I was lying in a bathtub. Uxian and Shiyu were standing next to me, each holding a towel, seemingly bathing me. Their faces were a mix of surprise and fluster. Uxian's gasp sounded like it was echoing from far away. The whole thing felt exactly like a bizarre dream, and I couldn't tell if it was real or fake. My mind immediately concluded this was just a dream. After all, how could these two usually shy girls be bathing me in real life when we weren't even dating? I had experienced too many overlapping dreams during my coma. I dreamed of my childhood with Zhu Ying and of high school, when Uxian sat next to me and asked me math questions. Then all those beautiful memories were torn apart by the apocalypse, turning into nightmares of being hunted, starving, and despairing. There were times I thought I had woken up, only to realize I was still dreaming. That feeling repeated so often I was no longer sure if I truly existed. So, seeing the scene before me, I was even more convinced this was just a rare, beautiful dream. And if it was a dream, there was no need to force myself to wake up. Thinking that, I gently closed my eyes, letting myself sink down, as both my mind and body were still exhausted from the battle at Shanghai. Seeing me close my eyes, Uxian's heart pounded wildly. She thought maybe I had just reacted in my sleep and wasn't fully awake yet. So she hurriedly wiped faster, determined to finish bathing and dressing me before things spiraled out of control. She leaned down, wiping the water from my face while softly calling my name, her voice trembling. The sensation was too real. My dreams were always vivid like this, but this time, I clearly felt the warmth on my face. Through my half-open eyes, I saw Uxian leaning over to tend to me. Because she was leaning so close, her white shirt gaped open, revealing a deep plunge. That image involuntarily brought back memories of high school, the times I secretly glanced at her in class, those small moments that had been etched into my memory for so long. I used to dream of being close to Uxian, but the gap between us back then was too vast. She came from a prestigious family, while I was just an orphan. I didn't even dare to hope. Yet in this dream, all distances seemed to vanish. Everything was so close I felt like I could just reach out and touch it. Believing this was only a dream, I couldn't help but reach up and gently touch her cheek. telling myself it was just a dream. For UXIN, it was an unbelievable moment. My hand was damp and warm, far too real, making her almost breathless as our eyes met through the warm steam. I saw that her shirt was wet, almost transparent in some places. Memories of our school days came rushing back. My hand slid from her cheek down to her neck, and then lower. The soft sensation was so real that even I was shaken. But in my mind, I kept reassuring myself that this was just a dream. UXIN froze, stiffening in surprise, while Shiyu, standing beside her, was equally stunned, not understanding why I was acting like this. I sat up in the tub, hesitated for a second, and then undid the first button of UXIN's shirt. As I did it, I convinced myself that in a dream, there were no boundaries. When I woke up, I would still be myself. I continued undoing each button, revealing her pale skin. My hand slid down to the curve of her waist, making UXIN breathe heavily. Shiyu couldn't hold back and spoke up, both flustered and heartbroken as she watched everything unfold right in front of her. I turned to her, and in my hazy state, reached out and pulled Shiyu by the waist too. In that moment, with both of them in my arms, everything spun so fast that they were both dizzy. Then I laid them down on the bed in the bedroom connected to the bathroom. My mind still believed this was a long dream, a place where I allowed myself to let loose a little before waking up. Thinking that, I further convinced myself that in a dream, morals and boundaries were blurred. As long as I was a decent person when I woke up, that was enough. And in that dream, I gently took off Shiyu's shirt. Her mind went blank, only managing to shakily beg me to stop. UXIN's voice was soft and delicate, just like her refined features. She was naturally timid. Even though she was close friends with Shiyu, they had never imagined experiencing something like this together. I didn't answer, and very quickly, both UXIN and Shiyu's clothes were stripped away by me. The two of them had perfect proportions in different ways. Shiyu was Kavya, while UXIN was slender with long, shapely legs. I lay between them, an arm around each, gently caressing them from under their arms. The feeling at that moment made me feel like I was floating in a tranquil paradise, more satisfying than anything I had ever imagined. I turned toward UXIN, one hand still touching Shiyu, and slowly removed UXIN's final piece of clothing. But right at that moment, Shiyu suddenly broke free from my grasp, ran into the bathroom, and locked the door, leaving me frozen, both regretful and confused. I couldn't chase after her. Only UXIN was left, so tense she couldn't speak. I didn't rush. I just held her, kissed her, and stroked her shoulders for a long time, until the anxiety in her gradually melted away, leaving behind an indescribable sense of harmony. In that moment, I crossed the line with her, a mix of pain and happiness intertwining. And when everything finally settled down, I saw the marks left on the bedsheets and froze. The sensation was too real, too clear, so strong that it yanked me out of the half-asleep state I had been in for so long, making me realize this was no longer a dream. That thought sent me into a panic. I rolled off UXIN, my face burning hot, not knowing what to say. UXIN just smiled shyly, thinking I was only overwhelmed by the heat of the moment, while I was completely speechless. I couldn't explain that I had mistakenly thought it was all a dream, and that very choice had exposed the deep, selfish part of me. Realizing that, I faltered, because that was my true nature. What else was there to explain? I discovered I wasn't some gentleman at all. I might keep a calm facade normally, but thinking about it, wasn't it because subconsciously I was afraid of any girl around me leaving, so I carefully kept my distance from all of them? In the environment of this base vehicle, once I established a relationship with one person, my relationship with the others would definitely change, except for Zhuing. UXIN blinked and asked if I still wanted Shiyu, making me freeze, unsure of how to answer. Then she pinched my side. She irritably told me that if I really wanted Shiyu, I had to treat her well and not force her, because Shiyu was very timid and couldn't handle the way I had just acted. Before the apocalypse, UXIN probably never thought she would say such things. But now everything was different. There were many girls in the vehicle, and I was the only man. She understood it was unrealistic to expect to be the only one, nor could she demand that I keep absolute boundaries with everyone else. Otherwise, the others would feel awkward and leave, and the Zhuing team might even fall apart. She thought that if one day I got together with Shiyu and intentionally distanced myself from her, the pain would probably be unbearable. She might even lose her reason to live, because she knew Shiyu also had feelings for me ever since she was rescued from the black market. UXIN didn't want to ruin Shiyu's life because of herself, much less lose the current Zhuing team. Because without me, she probably would have died in Shanghai a long time ago. And now she had things that many people dreamed of, so what more could she ask for? I awkwardly tried to explain, but UXIN just lightly pinched my side again. She told me that since I had touched Shiyu and made her hide in the bathroom out of embarrassment, I should go in and comfort her, while she would step out first. After saying that, she pulled the blanket over herself and discreetly got dressed, still shy in front of me, leaving me hesitating as I walked toward the bathroom, mocking myself that in my dream I was like a demon, but awake I was just a coward. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door, calling for Shiyu. After a moment of silence, she timidly opened it, wearing my dress shirt that reached down to her thighs. It was just enough to cover her body, but it still left me dizzy. The heat I had just put out felt like it was about to flare up again. Seeing my gaze, Shiyu blushed and stepped back, while I awkwardly rubbed my nose, realizing I must look terrifying. Honestly, I had been pulled right back to square one. I awkwardly apologized, saying I wasn't fully awake when I first came to. Shiyu pursed her lips and asked if everything I did was unconscious, leaving me speechless, not knowing how to answer. The more I spoke, the worse it got. I had actually touched Shiyu's body, and then claimed I wasn't in my right mind. Thinking about it, it was no different from the behavior of a scumbag who didn't dare take responsibility. A scumbag who also spoke without thinking. I had no choice but to explain, saying that of course it wasn't like that. It was just that having just woken up, my self-control was weaker than usual, which was why I did some crazy things. Hearing me mention my poor self-control, Shiyu froze for a moment. Throughout the long period of the apocalypse, I had always maintained a calm demeanor, never letting myself lose my way. To the point where sometimes she even doubted if she had any appeal to me at all. Today, she finally heard me say it. It turned out that all this time, I had just been trying to restrain myself. A hint of joy quietly swelled in her heart, even though this loss of control wasn't just for her, but also for UXIN. She softly asked if I had, with UXIN. I could only nod in admission. Hearing that, she didn't even know what she was feeling anymore. That meant I was already with UXIN. Thinking of this, her heart ached, and I could clearly feel the awkwardness and the invisible distance between us. Not wanting to reveal her thoughts, Shiyu changed the subject, saying everyone was waiting for me to wake up, and now that I was awake, I should go out and see Zhu Ying and the others. As she spoke, her eyes were always cast down, not daring to look straight at me. Seeing her like that, my heart suddenly felt heavy. I could feel her disappointment and sadness. Unable to hold back, I stepped forward and pulled Shiyu into a tight embrace, softly saying I was sorry. Her body stiffened for a moment, then gradually softened, letting me hold her. Her heart still ached, but there was an indescribable sense of security. She just wanted this moment to last forever. Right then, Shiyu saw UXIN poke her head out from the bathroom door, peeking in. Startled, she instinctively tried to pull away from my embrace, but I held her too tightly. UXIN blinked, gave a mischievous smile, and closed the door. That reaction left Shiyu stunned. The two of them were close friends. They understood each other with just a look. UXIN was intentionally giving me and Shiyu private space, even silently encouraging it. Thinking of that, Shiyu's heart grew even more tangled. Actually, over the past year of being by my side, her heart had long been unable to leave me. Moreover, I had just touched her body. To her, it was no different from crossing the final line. After half a year in my arms, Shiyu looked up earnestly. I leaned down and gently kissed her lips, just a fleeting touch like a dragonfly skimming the water. Then I wrapped my arms around her shoulders and the back of her knees, lifting her up. She weighed less than 45 kilos, so light I could barely feel her weight, like I was holding a strip of silk. I let out a soft gasp of surprise, but didn't have time to think much. I just carried her to the bed, tucked her in carefully, kissed her forehead lightly, and told her to get some sleep. She had been working too hard lately. I knew the battle with Shanghai had severely drained Shiyu's mental energy. Mental trauma took a lot of time to heal. Probably because she had been taking care of me so much, she really needed to rest. Even though she was incredibly alluring right now, I still tried my best to restrain myself. I couldn't bear to hurt her at a time like this. Seeing me so gentle, Shiyu suddenly felt incredibly happy, like a little princess being pampered. She said she wasn't tired and wanted to go out with me because Zhu Ying and the others must be worried. Hearing that, I took her hand and helped her up. She went into the bathroom to change, and just as I opened the door, I suddenly felt a quick, light kiss on my cheek. I turned around, but she had already run outside. As soon as I stepped out, Zhu Ying threw herself straight into my arms, overjoyed as she said I was finally awake. During the days I was in a coma, she was truly worried. Even though Ying had guaranteed I would wake up, Zhu Ying still couldn't put her mind at ease. I rubbed her head, saying I had slept too long and made everyone worry. After that, I got off the vehicle with Zhu Ying. Zhang Hai and Sun Kuan had also gathered, preparing to throw a barbecue party to celebrate my waking up. Sun Kuan laughed loudly, saying he knew I had great fortune and a tough life. Then he asked how I felt, mentioning that while I was comatose, I had absorbed over 30 mutant crystal cores. That number left me stunned, because during those days I was lost in endless dreams, completely unaware of what was happening to my body. Zhu Ying explained that after destroying Shanghai, they had collected a lot of crystal cores, and Ying had given most of them to me to absorb. Mentioning that I had been infected by the plague mother body, Zhu Ying even smiled mischievously, saying that after absorbing the crystal cores, my body excreted a lot of toxins, so Shiyu, Uxin, and even Xiang Shuahai had helped bathe me. This comment made Shiyu and Uxin blush endlessly, while Zhang Hai and Sun Kuan pretended not to hear, tacitly going back to preparing the grill. Hearing Xiang Shuahai mentioned, I couldn't help but freeze. So she had helped me too. This romantic entanglement seemed to be getting more and more complicated. I had always reminded myself to keep my distance. Yet after just one coma, I was entangled with 3 girls. This feeling was really awkward. Xiang Shuahai smiled and teased that I hadn't even said how my body was doing after absorbing so many crystal cores. My skin was enough to make even the girls jealous. I looked down at my hands, recalling the feeling when I held Shiyu just now. At that time, I barely felt any weight. Thinking back on it now, it must be because I had absorbed over 30 mutant crystal cores. Uxin said seriously that I had previously snapped an M2 machine gun in half, even when I was just infected with the plague mother body. She had studied those liquid organisms and knew that when they invaded a human body, they would parasitize the brain and control the central nervous system. But in my case, the plague mother body had failed to invade my brain. It could only exist in my body, and through observation with her mental energy, she believed my body had fused with, or more accurately, absorbed, the plague mother body. Hearing this, I looked over at Ying, and she nodded in confirmation. Her mental energy was linked to the star seed, so she understood my condition better than anyone else. Zhu Ying handed me a stack of documents taken from the Shanghai headquarters. Inside, there was not only information about the infected, but also data on Dawn and a summary of a scientific expedition from over half a century ago. Looking at that thick stack of documents, I took a deep breath. Its value was immeasurable, but right now I didn't have time to read it carefully. I just flipped to the section about the infected and started reading. According to Dawn's hypothesis, this liquid organism originated from the remnants of that expedition years ago. It might have come from deep space beyond Earth, possessing a life form completely different from life on this planet. They didn't have a cellular structure, and their solvent was completely different from the solvent of life on Earth. Life on Earth, whether animal, plant, bacteria, or fungi, all relied on only one solvent: water. There were organisms that didn't need air, didn't need light, and didn't even need organic matter. They could survive on just a little iron powder or sulfur, but they absolutely could not lack water. Even viruses, whether they had DNA or not, still needed water as a solvent to reproduce. But this liquid organism was completely different. Their solvent was liquid methane. According to Dawn's documents, this organism originated from an extremely cold planet, a place where the temperature constantly stayed around minus 170 to 180 degrees Celsius. That planet also had lakes, rivers, and even oceans and rainstorms, but they were all made of liquid methane. Dawn had even entertained the idea of bringing this liquid organism to distant planets in the solar system to see if they could multiply. This organism, born in an environment of extreme cold, inherently contained a massive amount of energy. But Earth was too hot for them, making their movements here sluggish. Therefore, they could only function by infecting human bodies, invading the brain and mind, and then being remotely controlled by the man in black using mental energy. The energy within them could grant the infected immense power. A normal person, after being infected, could increase their strength by 7 or 8 times, and their speed by 3 or 4 times. Their resilience was also incredibly high. As long as the head and heart weren't damaged, other injuries wouldn't kill them, and they could even heal on their own. But what I was infected with wasn't the normal plague, it was the plague mother body. According to Dawn, all other liquid organisms were isolated and cultivated from this original mother body. The power of the plague mother body was so great that even the man in black couldn't fully grasp it. Yet in its clash with the star seed, the plague mother body had failed and been absorbed by my body. When I first woke up, because the sensory stimulation was too strong and I was preoccupied with intimate matters, I hadn't truly felt the changes in myself. But now that I had calmed down, I suddenly realized my body was vastly different from before. A current of blue energy existed within me. Even though I couldn't see it with my naked eye, I could feel it clearly, just like the sensation of my own arms and legs. I even felt like I could control this blue energy. I reached out my hand and opened my palm. Following my will, specks of blue light began to gather, gradually forming a small sphere. At first, it was only the size of an egg, but it quickly expanded, radiating a brilliant blue light, like a burning blue sun. Zhu Ying's eyes widened, and she cried out in shock that it was the plague mother body, because the last time the man in black took out the mother body, it looked exactly like this sphere of blue light. Uxin couldn't hide her astonishment either, saying that the fact I could control the plague mother body was truly unbelievable, because historically, it was always humans who were controlled by the plague. I spoke up to deny it, saying this was no longer the plague mother body, but energy that belonged to me. The original consciousness of the mother body had been wiped clean. This blue organism had now become a part of my body, like an arm or a leg, inseparable. This was my energy. As the blue energy continued to surge, the sphere in my palm grew to the size of a fist. Uxin observed my body's state with her mental energy and discovered that all the blue energy was flowing along fixed pathways, intertwining into a complex network. When I absorbed the mutant crystal cores to cleanse my marrow, the energy had also flowed through similar networks. Those networks were exactly the meridians from Legends. This change left Uxin completely astounded. There was no doubt about it anymore. I was now completely different from any other psychic. I also quickly realized my limits. When I drew out the blue energy in my body to a certain point, I couldn't mobilize anymore. My current limit was creating an energy sphere the size of a fist. Shiyu asked how I felt, and I replied that there was nothing too special. It was just that when I summoned the blue energy, my body didn't seem as strong as it originally was. The sphere of blue light had now completely stabilized, able to float in midair on its own. I looked over at the military jeep that Zhang Hai had brought, walked over, grabbed the rear of the vehicle, and exerted force. The vehicle shook, and the rear wheels were easily lifted off the ground by me. A jeep weighed about 2 or 3 tons, and the rear end bore a load of about 1.5 tons, yet I lifted it with almost no effort. As I focused my mind, the energy sphere in the air began to emit countless blue light particles, flowing back into my body in droves. In that instant, I felt my strength skyrocket. I lifted the entire jeep into the air effortlessly. Xiang Shuahai couldn't hide her amazement, exclaiming that I was truly too strong. Controlling such a large vehicle was inherently difficult. Just a slight slip of the hand would throw it off balance. But I did it so easily, which showed that the limit of my strength was far beyond this level. I set the jeep down, then raised my right hand and clenched it into a fist. The blue energy immediately enveloped my entire fist. I punched straight into the car door. A loud bang rang out. The vehicle shook violently, and the door was punched through. The sharp metal shards couldn't hurt my hand because the energy protected it. Seeing that, I couldn't hold back my joy. I hadn't used much force in that punch, but thanks to the blue energy, the penetrating power was terrifying. I raised my left hand, the blue energy wrapping around it as well, and unleashed a flurry of punches. In the blink of an eye, the car door was completely smashed to pieces. Xiang Shuahai's eyes sparkled with stars, because aside from my own strength, I also had that massive bus. Zhang Hai, on the other hand, sighed miserably, saying that was a Hummer he had worked so hard to find, and I had already ruined it. I just laughed, telling him that since he already had a tank, he didn't need a Jeep anymore. After Shanghai was destroyed, they had surely found enough diesel to keep the Type 99 running. Seeing my strength advance by leaps and bounds, Zhuing happily said that if I met that guy flying in the sky on a piece of iron again, I would easily take him down. I nodded, saying I could probably put up a fight. But as the man in black had said, Dawn had 11 council members. The Shanghai we killed was only good at mental control. His personal combat strength wasn't necessarily high. As for the other members of Dawn, especially those specializing in combat, they would definitely be much stronger than him. Ever since I learned of Dawn's true existence, I always had a sense of danger in my heart. This organization had existed for over half a century, possessing technology far beyond the present. Their members had started enhancing their bodies at least 10 years ago. Meanwhile, I had only been on this path for a year. If I wanted to catch up to them, I couldn't afford to slack off. Zhuing added that Dawn's people might have gone to Japan, where their weapon was hidden. I fell deep in thought when I heard the word Japan. Something Dawn valued so much was definitely no ordinary thing. And since there was already irreconcilable bad blood between us, I absolutely couldn't let them get that weapon, no matter where it was. I chuckled and said I had never been abroad before. That statement left everyone stunned. Zhuing immediately got excited, saying we were about to go to Japan. Before the apocalypse, she had never been abroad either. Now, crossing the sea during the apocalypse made her feel like she was embarking on a dangerous adventure. I nodded, confirming my decision. I didn't know what Japan would be like in the apocalypse. Honestly, I had never been interested in that country before. Going now was only for the weapon. But once the decision was made, curiosity sparked within me about the apocalyptic situation in other countries. The pandemic was global, but I still didn't know which places were more devastated than others. At this moment, Zhang Hai looked hesitant. He thought for a while before stepping forward to say he had something to discuss with me. I looked at him, then noticed a girl standing not far away. It was Song Helu, Zhu Ying's classmate. There was a bit of worry and shyness on her face, while Zhang Hai was scratching his head in frustration. I immediately understood, smiling as I patted his shoulder, saying, "Not bad. I didn't expect you to quietly win her over like that." No, I'm still pursuing her." Zhang Hai quickly waved his hands, adamantly explaining. I laughed, casually congratulating him in advance, saying this was like an old tree blooming. Zhang Hai immediately retorted dejectedly, saying he was only in his 30s. I knew he brought this up because he was stuck and didn't know what to do, so he came to me for advice. Bring Song Helu along. But the trip to the island nation was already fraught with danger. Bringing an ordinary person along would definitely be a burden. Even Zhang Hai found it hard to suggest that. Moreover, Song Helu still had her father and a group of survivors here. She might not be willing to leave everything behind to follow us. I thought for a moment and said bluntly, "Then you and Sun Cohen stay here." The Type 99 tank couldn't be brought to the island nation anyway, so leaving it behind would prevent it from going to waste. Zhang Hai was genuinely surprised, as he had never considered that option. I smiled and told him it wasn't like we were going to the island nation and never coming back. Don't look at me like we're parting forever. Right then, Zhuing suddenly popped out from behind me, blinking meaningfully, and added that with Zhang Hai staying behind to take care of her classmate, she'd feel much more at ease. She knew Zhang Hai's personality. Having him here made her happy for him and relieved for Song Helu. Zhang Hai was a straightforward guy. Seeing me say that, he stopped beating around the bush. Especially after witnessing the strength I had just displayed, he was even more confident that the group's trip to the island nation would be fine, and his tagging along might not even be of much help. Zhang Hai excitedly declared that he would stay and build a solid rear base for me. I nodded, because if we had a base like that, our family and friends could live there, while the base vehicle would remain a mobile fortress. Not just me, but the girls on the vehicle, as well as Zhang Hai and Sun Kuan, all had loved ones. I couldn't bring everyone along, so a safe haven like that was very necessary. Even so, I didn't plan on building a city-style base. This place would only be for those closest to us. At that moment, I suddenly noticed another person. That person was in such a wretched state that it took me a moment to remember who he was. It turned out to be Luo Jiafeng. Once an imposing commander, he was now as filthy as a beggar, completely different from his former appearance. I tossed him over to Zhang Hai to deal with. He immediately replied, "No problem." As for how he dealt with him, I didn't care. So Zhang Hai and Sun Kuan stayed behind to continue operating the Type 99, while I and the others boarded the base vehicle, heading toward Shanghai. After the apocalypse, I had been to Shanghai once. Back then, the safe zone here had left quite a deep impression on me. But looking at it now, everything was just ruins. The once expansive highway was now littered with bones, and everywhere there were signs of explosions and abandoned vehicles. During the Great Evacuation, who knew how many people had died on this road? But this time, we didn't enter the safe zone in Shanghai. According to the documents, Don had a headquarters in Edo City in the island nation, so I planned to head straight there. The base vehicle entered a port in Shanghai, which was packed with cargo ships and containers, but there was absolutely no sign of anyone. Leaving the mouth of the Yangtze River, we would enter the East China Sea. Looking at the vast river, I remembered the giant monster we had encountered in Jinling. Even so, now that the base vehicle had combat capabilities on the water, I was very confident. Just as we were about to set off, Xiang Shuahai suddenly asked a question that made everyone freeze. Does anyone know how to drive a ship? Actually, she had wanted to ask for a long time, but seeing me act so decisively, she thought I had already made arrangements. Yet even now, she hadn't seen me hire a captain and finally couldn't hold it in anymore. I just smiled, pushing forward, and said, "This is our captain." As the manager of the base vehicle, Ing wasn't just good at driving. When the vehicle switched to water travel mode, she could pilot the ship with ease too. Xiang Shuahai couldn't help but exclaim in praise of Ying's skills. Since joining the group, she had integrated well with everyone and had chatted with Ying too. Even though Ying's coldness and mystery made her hard to read, and no one truly knew her background, Xiang Shuahai didn't mind. Because if I trusted Ying, she trusted her too, and she didn't want to ask too much about the secrets surrounding me. The base vehicle roared, then slowly plunged into the water. Xiang Shuahai's eyes widened, about to scream, but Zhu Ying covered her mouth and giggled, saying it was fine. As the front of the vehicle submerged, it immediately transformed, quickly turning into a high-speed boat. With a splash, it landed on the water, kicking up massive waves. Xiang Shuahai stared at the warship in astonishment, her eyes suddenly sparkling as if she remembered something. In Subei, she had seen this warship, and then it disappeared, replaced by my base vehicle. She hadn't asked back then, because that was my business. Only now did she realize that this massive bus could transform into a warship. Anyway, it was convenient. Plus, we had two people who knew the island nation's language with us, so communication wouldn't be a problem. While everyone was still chatting, the base vehicle had entered the city center. In the island nation, outside of Edo, the buildings generally weren't very tall, only 3 or 4 stories, interspersed with many wooden houses. This was related to their building habits, as they didn't want high rises blocking the sunlight. Going deeper, I noticed the streets were quite narrow, especially for a large vehicle like the base vehicle. Occasionally, there were abandoned cars blocking the way, forcing the base vehicle to use its horns to push them aside. The main roads still hadn't been cleared, proving that if there was a group of survivors in Wakayama, they weren't strong. Otherwise, the roads would have been cleared long ago. Suddenly, Ing spoke up, warning that there was something ahead. I looked up and saw a building that looked like a school at the end of the street. There was even a sign by the road that read School Zone. She said it was a high school. I nodded, because what Ing was warning about was a horde of zombies, dozens of them, surrounding the school. Shiyu expanded her mental vision and quickly grasped the situation inside. She said there were 6 survivors in the building. It was highly likely this was their base. While out scavenging for food, they had accidentally lured the zombie horde over. Among the horde was a mutant zombie with some intelligence. It led the pack swarming into the building, cornering the survivors on the rooftop. The base vehicle stopped in front of the school gates, and I got a clear look at the zombie horde. Most were office workers, men in suits, women in uniform blouses, but their clothes had torn over time, revealing messy glimpses of underwear. The zombies roared mindlessly, surging toward the rooftop. The survivors in the school had been pushed to a dead end. If this continued, their only option was to fight to the death, and their chances of winning were practically zero. Right then, I was surprised to see a rope thrown down from the rooftop. One end was already secured, and all 6 people began climbing down one by one at the edge of the building, where there were fewer zombies. I chuckled, saying they were pretty well prepared. This group might not be strong, but they knew how to plan ahead. They clearly had an escape route ready from the rooftop. They were 3 boys and 3 girls, all wearing Island Nation high school uniforms. The boys wore small blazers, and the girls wore sailor skirts. Despite the apocalypse dragging on, their clothes were still relatively clean. Among them was a girl with incredibly fast reflexes. While helping the others keep from slipping off the rope, she wielded a long sword, taking the lead to slash at zombies and clear a path. She looked only 16 or 17, but among level 1 psychics, she was considered quite strong. She fought while covering the others, letting her friends run first while she stayed behind to hold the line. Just then, the mutant zombie on the rooftop spotted their escape route. It roared and leaped down from above. A chill ran down the girl's spine. She knew full well she was no match for it. If they clashed, all 6 of them would be slaughtered. She hurriedly yelled for everyone to run first, saying she would hold it off. The sword in her hand was already chipped from a year of slaughtering, and now, facing a mutant zombie, she had absolutely no chance of winning. Another girl even tried to turn back and call her name, saying, "But Natsumi." But fear quickly overpowered everything, and the other 5 fled in panic. After just one brief clash, Natsumi's sword was snapped by the mutant zombie. She was sent flying, her right hand that held the sword broken as well. Her strength was far too inferior to it. At that exact moment, Zhuing jumped out of the base vehicle. She couldn't bear to watch a girl her age be torn apart and eaten by zombies, so she dashed forward like a streak of blue lightning. Before Zhuing even arrived, blue electricity blanketed an area dozens of meters wide, turning it into a sea of lightning. The mutant zombie was caught in it and instantly blasted away. Zhuing shouted, "Die!" and threw a punch, hurling the mutant zombie into the building's drainage pipe. A massive electrical current surged through its body, traveling down the pipe to the ground, turning it into a lump of charcoal. Then, Zhuing roared, unleashing all her electrical energy, 100,000 volts. The normal zombies around died on the spot. Any that didn't die were left twitching and gasping for their last breath. In just a few seconds, the area around the school was completely cleared of zombies. The remaining ones inside the building, having lost the mutant zombies' command and unable to detect the humans outside, just wandered aimlessly through the school. Watching Zhu Ying in action, the group of survivors was dumbfounded. They originally thought they were definitely going to die today. Who would have expected a female god of war to appear, erecting a massive electrical grid and wiping out the zombies in the blink of an eye? Natsumi had previously thought she was the strongest among the schoolgirls, but now she realized there was someone far stronger, beyond her wildest imagination. Natsumi looked at Zhu Ying with eyes shining like stars, then blurted out, calling her the invincible electric princess, Misaka Makoto, and eagerly asking if she was definitely Misaka. At first, I saw Zhu Ying step in just because she didn't want to see that girl die a gruesome death. But hearing her called that, Zhu Ying got a bit embarrassed and quickly waved her hands, saying she wasn't. I didn't understand the island nation's language, but after 2 days of listening to Shiyu talk a lot, plus my own deductive skills, I vaguely had some impression, at least of the word Misaka, that Natsumi repeated twice. I asked who Misaka was, and Zhu Ying said it was an anime character known as the Electric Girl. Then she turned and waved at Natsumi, introducing herself as Jiang Zhu Ying. But Natsumi was incredibly excited, saying that in her eyes, Zhu Ying was Misaka, both strong and cool, so she would definitely call her sister Misaka. I could see the excitement in Natsumi's eyes. Perhaps to her, the moment Zhu Ying, covered in blue lightning, descended from the sky to save people, was no different from a scene straight out of an anime. Moreover, that power was terrifyingly beyond imagination. So abilities could actually be used like that. Zhu reached out her hand and asked for her name. Natsumi happily took it, introducing herself as Natsumi, a main Natsumi. Shiyu also smiled and stepped forward, asking gently, saying we wanted to find out a few things. Right then, someone loudly called Natsumi's name. She turned her head and saw 6 or 7 people riding motorcycles rushing over. Leading the group was a young man in his early 20s, wearing a one-piece leather suit like a racer, a helmet, and riding an incredibly cool-looking Suzuki. As soon as he got off the bike, he put his hands on Xiaomei's shoulders, asking her with concern. Xiaomei took a step back, calling him brother, but clearly not happy to see him. The young man immediately scolded her, saying he had told her not to risk going out, and if he had arrived a little later today, the consequences would have been unimaginable. As he spoke, he took off his helmet, revealing a green tattoo extending from his neck down, its full extent unknown. Xiaomei snorted coldly, saying he acted as if he was the one who saved her, when the one who saved her today was Sister Misaka. Otherwise, she would have become a zombie. After speaking, she moved closer to Zhu. I saw the tattooed young man look at Zhu in surprise. Following the distress flare, Xiaomei had been attacked by a highly mutated zombie, yet by the time he arrived, the danger had already been resolved. And it was done by such a delicate-looking girl. Not only that, she was so beautiful that he couldn't take his eyes off her. He bowed to thank Zhu, while Zhu just politely said it was no trouble at all. But I realized she still didn't understand the relationship between these two siblings, because the atmosphere between them was clearly very tense. Hearing Zhu Ying's voice, the tattooed young man suddenly looked up, asking if we were from Huaxia. Although the island nation's language is easy to learn, speaking it with a perfect Kansai accent isn't easy. Even Ren Xiu noticed this. Zhu Ying nodded in acknowledgement, and I clearly saw the young man frown. His gaze swept past Zhu Ying, then to me and Xiu, his attitude turning noticeably colder. Right then, he suddenly grabbed Xia Mei's wrist tightly, forcing her to go back with him. Xia Mei firmly shook her head, but he told her she had no choice, even glancing at her friends with disdain. He said he could take that bunch of useless trash into the guild, giving them a job with an income. Xia Mei angrily retorted, saying she didn't want to join the mafia, didn't want to join the scavenger guild, and didn't want to live a life of robbing and killing like him. The tattooed young man said coldly that without his protection, she couldn't survive. In Wakayama Prefecture, the base was gone, and she had nowhere else to go. He turned to Xia Mei's 5 friends, promising to let them join the scavenger guild and become regular citizens. I clearly saw the hesitation on the faces of those 5, but in the end, out of fear of death and for a stable life, they still bowed their heads and chose to join the guild, leaving Xia Mei behind. I shook my head slightly. Even though I didn't directly understand the island nation's language, everything was translated by Xiu through our mental link. I guessed these 5 were originally weaklings discarded by the scavenger guild before, taken in by Xia Mei. But when it came to life and death, they still chose the safe path for themselves, even if it meant living like dogs without freedom. Better to be a dog in peacetime than a human in chaos. Xia Mei snorted coldly, though this was clearly a huge blow to her. The tattooed young man got angry, tightening his grip on Xia Mei's wrist, declaring that she absolutely had to follow him today, even if he had to use force. Zhu Ying couldn't take it anymore. She spoke up, asking what exactly was going on, then bluntly told him to listen carefully. Xia Mei had said she didn't want to go. The young man growled, saying this was a family matter and she didn't need to interfere. He even took a step forward, glaring at Zhu Ying threateningly. I saw Zhu Ying get genuinely angry. She had just saved someone, yet she was being treated like this. The tattooed young man said we were from Longting, and in the past, he would have just killed us on sight. Today, out of respect for Xia Mei, he let us off once, advising us not to make him angry. Zhu Ying laughed coldly, saying she didn't need anyone to let her off. Immediately, he placed his hand on the hilt of his sword, as if wanting to test her strength. Xia Mei screamed in panic, saying Zhu Ying was her savior, then couldn't help but expose her brother's past. Before the apocalypse, he went to prison for drug trafficking. It angered their mother to death, then their father passed away too. As for him, He committed rape, murder, and robbery. She said she had long stopped considering him her brother. Hearing those words, the tattooed young man's eye twitched. Then he slowly released his grip on the sword hilt. I saw Zhuing stunned. It turned out this guy was already a gangster before the apocalypse, and later just joined a larger criminal organization. Zhuing coldly cursed him as scum, saying his existence only polluted this world, and she was especially disgusted by those who used the apocalypse to rape women. The tattooed young man's eyes immediately filled with murderous intent, but Xiaomei quickly stopped him, begging Zhuing not to anger him anymore, because he really was capable of anything. Finally, the tattooed young man declared he'd let us off one last time, saying Zhuing only saved Xiaomei's friends. As for Xiaomei herself, she could have completely held out until he arrived. He turned to force Xiaomei to choose, asking if she wanted to follow the Huaxia group to Longting, then coldly stated he wouldn't allow her to join Longting, much less follow a group with a Huaxia man. When he said this, his gaze shot straight at me. If it were just Zhuing, he probably wouldn't have reacted so strongly. But my presence made him uneasy about letting his beautiful younger sister, who was only in high school, follow a Huaxia man. Hearing her brother's words, Xiaomei was so angry she almost went crazy. She screamed, asking what nonsense he was spouting. She never had any intention of joining Sister Misaka's team, and even if she wanted to, they might not even accept her. I saw Xiaomei glaring furiously at her brother. In her eyes, there was not only anger but also fear, because she knew very well he wasn't just evil. He also had an almost twisted control over her. There was once a male student who pursued Xiaomei. Even though she had absolutely no interest, he kept pestering her relentlessly. As a result, her brother had his men beat that boy until several of his ribs were broken. From then on, whenever he saw Xiaomei, he'd lower his head and dodge her. And that guy was from the island nation. If he had been from Huaxia, his fate would have probably been a whole lot worse. Xiaomei didn't want to drag me into this. In her eyes, her brother was nothing short of a lunatic, and one who held quite a bit of power in the control board, to boot. In this lawless world, he could get away with absolutely anything he wanted. Right now, Xiaomei's only wish was for us to leave immediately and stay far away from the mess her brother brought with him. But to her surprise, Jiang Chuing suddenly stepped up, threw an arm around her shoulder, and teased with a mischievous smile that little sister Xiaomei seemed to have nowhere else to go. So just tag along with us for now. The RV is super comfy, it has a bed, and you can even take a real shower. After saying that, Chuing even winked at me. Hearing Ren Xiu translate this, I just stayed quiet. I knew perfectly well that Chuing hadn't actually planned on bringing Xiaomei along. She was just deliberately trying to piss off her arrogant brother. Sure enough, the tattooed guy's face darkened instantly. Those words were a blatant provocation. He coldly spat out that we were digging our own graves, muttering that he always knew the people from Longting didn't know what was good for them. Then he turned his malicious glare on me, sneering that I sure was a lucky bastard, surrounded by so many beautiful women. Even if a guy like me hadn't crossed him, he wouldn't have let me live anyway. Originally, he planned to let me off the hook for saving Xiaomei, but my sister kept using Xiaomei to provoke him. It made him feel like I was too much of a threat, afraid that an innocent girl like Xiaomei would be easily swindled by a playboy like me. With that, he drew his long katana, lightly ran his finger along the blade, and gave a sinister smile. He asked how I'd feel if he castrated me. Xiaomei screamed in panic, tears welling up in her eyes, but she was completely powerless to stop her brother. The katana slashed forward, so fast it was nothing but a cold flash of light tearing through the air. Speed was his greatest pride. An extreme speed that could end the lives of many high-level elemental espers before they even had time to react. But in that very split second, an ear-piercing clang rang out. The tattooed guy's body violently shuddered. He felt a terrifying force crash into him. The katana froze mid-air, the pure recoil numbing his entire palm. He looked up, absolutely bewildered, watching in utter disbelief as I gripped the bare blade with my naked hand. How is this possible? A strike that fast and heavy could slice right through a tree trunk as thick as a man's waist. Yet, caught barehanded, time seemed to stand still. I remained exactly where I was, unmoving, firmly holding the blade. No matter how desperately he pulled, it wouldn't budge an inch. Blinding blue sparks flared from my palm, stinging his eyes. Immediately after, with a sharp metallic snap, the sword in his hands suddenly went light. I had cleanly snapped it in half. I held the broken half of the blade, twirling it casually in my hand like a toy, and asked him to repeat what he just said about Longting. But he wasn't in any state to listen. Staring blankly at the shattered blade, his eyes went bloodshot as he let out a scream of pure despair. To the warriors of the island nation, a katana wasn't just a weapon, it was their second life. He fancied himself a modern samurai, and that blade was his absolute pride. Before he could even process it, I planted a straight punch square into his chest. The impact sent him flying like a broken ragdoll. He smashed through the wall behind him, bringing down a shower of rubble and broken bricks. In the next breath, I hurled the broken blade. It shot forward like a lightning bolt, burying itself right between his legs. A blood-curdling shriek tore through the air. Blood pooled instantly. He writhed on the ground, curled up like a cooked shrimp, agonizing over the fact that he had just been castrated by his own sword. It all happened so fast. His lackeys couldn't even react. They could only shout for their boss in sheer panic. None of them dared to charge forward. My terrifying display made them realize they'd end up no better than him if they tried. I looked down at my hand and slowly clenched my fist. Ever since the apocalypse began, I've fought countless battles. But most of them relied on firearms and my mobile base. I rarely ever fought in close-quarters combat. Today, after my body's evolution, was the first time I truly unleashed my physical strength. Feeling this power surging through my veins like a raging river gave me an incredible, unexplainable high. This kind of raw, visceral combat, it really does make a man's blood boil with excitement. I flatly told him that the only reason he was still breathing was because of his sister's kindness. But whatever he planned to do to me, I was going to do right back to him. That's only fair. Besides, word on the street is he likes forcing himself on people. Cutting off his junk was my way of doing the world a favor. Rin Xiu immediately translated every word of it for him. I glanced over at Xiaomei. I actually had a good impression of the kid. In this brutal apocalypse, she was still willing to help her friends, even at the risk of her own life. But that was exactly why she was too naive. I had just crippled her brother. Even if she didn't want to acknowledge him, they still shared the same blood. Watching her brother writhe on the ground, Xia Mei stood frozen. Memories flooded back, her emotions tangling into a heavy knot. Chu Ying whispered an apology, blaming herself for acting so impulsively. But Xia Mei shook her head. She said that as sad as she felt, she knew the sins her brother committed meant he deserved to die a long time ago. And punishing him gave the girls he had harmed, or would have harmed in the future, a chance to live. I didn't say anything else. I just watched his lackeys hastily bandage him up and carry him away in a panic. I didn't stop them, doing it out of respect for Xia Mei. I apologized to her, but Xia Mei insisted that she should be the one apologizing. She said the apocalypse was like opening Pandora's box, and I was just the one closing it. If I didn't do it, someone else would have. The calm maturity coming from a 16-year-old girl honestly surprised me. Through Rin Xiu's translation, I asked Xia Mei if she knew what Longting was. She explained that it was an organization mostly made up of Huaxia people stranded in the island nation, those who couldn't return home when the apocalypse broke out. Hearing that, it all clicked. Huaxia people were numerous, and many loved living or traveling abroad. So, banding together for survival after the world ended made perfect sense. I asked if Long Tongue had any conflicts with the Sword Slayer Society. Xia Mei said they lived in harmony at first, but when resources ran low and disputes over spirit cores erupted, gangs started killing each other. The Sword Slayer Society rose to power, getting rich through looting and information brokering, eventually dominating almost all of Waka Province. Long Tongue was outnumbered and no match for them. They were gradually driven to remote areas. If they encountered extremists like her brother, they'd be wiped out without mercy. I nodded, finally understanding the situation. In this post-apocalyptic era, I knew all too well that human relationships had rotted away, replaced by deception, suspicion, violence, and slaughter. When even friends or teammates can stab you in the back, you can't expect harmony from strangers. Hoping that people of different races, nations, or even those with historical conflicts could live together in peace was just a pipe dream. When interests and survival are at stake, war is almost inevitable. I asked Xia Mei if life was difficult for Long Tongue now that they'd fled to the outskirts. She nodded, saying they moved to Akina town. The supermarkets were destroyed, leaving only a few convenience stores. They survived mainly by hunting mutated beasts, foraging in the forest, or farming. I nodded. In the apocalypse, foraging in the forest is a death sentence because mutated beasts lurk everywhere. Farming was only a secondary source since few people knew how to cultivate land, not to mention the lack of seeds and fertilizer. Before the apocalypse, farmers used high-yield hybrid seeds from research stations. Now, even if they could grow anything, the yield was incredibly low. I sighed, thinking about how hard it must be for the Chinese people living in a foreign land. Even before the apocalypse, it was harder for them to find work in the island nation than for the locals, let alone now. If I get the chance, maybe I should lend them a hand. I asked more about the Sword Slayer Society. Xia Mei said they also collect and sell information to small teams for profit. This caught my attention because the ability to gather news in the apocalypse is extremely rare. I wondered if they had any info on Light, though I didn't get my hopes up. But since our path would cross the center of Waka Province, the Sword Slayer Society's territory, I decided to stop by and check it out. Then, I told everyone to get ready to move. Jiang Zhuing turned to Xia Mei and suggested she come along, saying she could teach her combat skills since no one had probably guided her properly in this environment. I could see that Jiang Zhuing genuinely liked Xia Mei. The girl hesitated. Honestly, she really wanted to follow Jiang Zhuing, but her brother was seriously injured. No matter how terrible he was still her flesh and blood. She feared that if he knew she left, he'd be consumed by rage. Finally, Xia Mei shook her head and said she should stay. Jiang Zhuing didn't push. She went into the room, grabbed something wrapped in bubble wrap, and handed it to her. Inside was an exquisite anime figure. Xia Mei cheered because the Pikachu was so cute. Jiang Zhuing blushed because the girl unwrapped it so quickly. I laughed, teasing that Jiang Zhuing's true spirit was Pikachu, not Misaka Mikoto, since she kept the Pikachu figure instead of the Misaka one. Jiang Zhuing coughed slightly, arguing that the Misaka figure was too expensive back then. Now that the island nation's hobby shops were abandoned, she'd go and collect them all. Her eyes lit up. She was clearly excited. Eventually, Jiang Zhuing had to say goodbye to Xia Mei, giving her a pistol and some ammo for self-defense. Based on Xia Mei's info, my base vehicle headed straight for the busiest central area of Waka Province. It used to be a bustling city with millions of residents and duty-free shops packed with tourists. Now it was just ruins. Designer bags and cosmetics that were once highly sought after were now covered in dust, ignored by everyone. The streets were surprisingly wide, and the abandoned cars had been cleared away. A road this clean proved that the paranormals in this area were very strong. Only they would have the power to clear the main thoroughfares of an entire city. As the base vehicle entered the urban area, I saw a wall 4 or 5 meters high stretching almost endlessly. That was the safe zone. In the apocalypse, the only place ordinary people could barely survive in peace was a safe zone. This zone wasn't large, nowhere near the scale of the Shanghai safe zone built by the military, but the difference was that this place was controlled by a single gang. Gangs in this island nation were much stronger than those in China. In China, large gangs only existed before the country was fully unified, when the government lacked total control over the territory. That's when groups like the Green Gang and the Red Gang appeared. Even a gang leader in Shanghai was once called the Emperor of Shanghai. But by the 21st century, that was all history. Almost no gang names were mentioned across China anymore. The island nation was different. Local governments held more assets than the central government, and the people owned more wealth than the state. Wealth dictates power, which directly fueled the formation of massive gangs. The Yamaguchi-gumi, the world's largest gang, had existed for over 100 years when the apocalypse began. Even the Russian mafia, ranked second, only made a fraction of their revenue. There was simply no comparison. The island nation's gangs stood out because it was the only country that legalized them. Mobsters could openly open headquarters and even secretly donate to local politicians in exchange for favors. The law allowed freedom of association, and gangs were seen as a type of association. The government couldn't arrest people just because they might commit a crime. Mobsters could even list Yakuza as their occupation on their household registry. Of course, Activities like protection rackets, gambling, prostitution, drug trafficking, and smuggling still happened in the shadows, even if they outwardly claimed to follow the law. Sometimes, they even played the role of police, maintaining order in their territory. But when the government collapsed in the apocalypse, all those facades vanished. The gangs returned to their true nature, becoming even more rampant than before. Before the apocalypse, the island nation was seen as polite and highly civilized, but long-term oppression and restraint had suppressed human nature. When the apocalypse broke out, the ugly side of humanity quickly surfaced. Ordinary people living in gang-built safe zones didn't have to worry about being eaten by zombies, but life was far from easy. When I drove the vehicle into the safe zone, there were no strict checks. Only a few gang members stood guard half-heartedly. Entry and exit were very free. The Sword Slayer Society's safe zone didn't ban outsiders, but if you wanted to stay long-term, you had to buy a house, and there was a nighttime curfew. The tattooed guy's promise to Xiaomei's classmates was actually just a shack in the slums, but even that was enough to make them grateful. Inside the base vehicle, I took the time to learn the local language with Rinshiyu. Since my first evolution, I had chosen to enhance my brain. My learning ability now far exceeded what it used to be. I could handle basic communication in about a week. Just then, Rinshiyu pointed out the window. I turned to look and saw the stark contrast within the safe zone. Some were gaunt and in rags, while others were dressed luxuriously with healthy complexions. Everyone gathered around the safe zone gate, where there was a large market. The entrance to the safe zone was the market itself, classic gang style. I glanced over and saw well-dressed people trading mutated spirit cores and beast meat. In the center of the market, large slabs of meat were on display. Mutated pigs and cows hung from iron hooks like livestock before the apocalypse, their bellies slit and blood dripping into basins. In front of each stall stood a man with a large knife, likely a paranormal or a butcher. Next to that was a produce market with flour, dried vegetables, and even raw fish. They had everything, but most buyers were paranormals. The starving poor could only stand by and drool, probably having not eaten their fill in a long time. They came here mainly to sell a bit of their own produce. Since many areas had resumed simple farming, the yield was low, but it was enough to scrape by. On the east side of the market, I saw a large slave market. Male and female slaves were on display for sale. Male slaves were dirt cheap, while beautiful female slaves started at 100 pounds of mutated beast meat. Seeing these women in tattered clothes being treated like cargo, I couldn't help but shake my head. 100 pounds of meat for a person, literally a pound of meat for a pound of human. This slave trade wasn't just in the island nation. It existed in China during the apocalypse too. Some people even sold themselves for various reasons. In front of the female slaves stood a fat man, over 200 pounds, shirtless and covered in green tattoos. In the island nation, gang tattoos were almost a status symbol in the underworld. He held a leather whip, incessantly introducing 12 female slaves to passers-by. He claimed they were all young, untouched, and could be bought and trained. Among them was even a young girl who looked only 15 or 16. After hearing this, Rinshiyu's expression became complicated. She whispered to me that some of them were from Longtong. Among the 12 slaves were locals and Europeans, but the Chinese were the most numerous, 6 in total. They were all members of Longtong. Some even had paranormal abilities, though not the combat type. Even though Longtong had retreated to Akina, their small teams could still be taken prisoner while operating outside. Some were even kidnapped and sold into slavery just for being beautiful. In the apocalypse, without human rights or power, you're just merchandise. Rinshiyu was choked up. She had been a slave once, locked in a cage and nearly sold, so she knew exactly how tragic the outcome would be. Just thinking about it made her nauseous. Jiang Zhuing also looked at me, clearly feeling uneasy. I fell silent for a moment, then sighed and told Zhuing to stop the car. The door opened. I, Jiang Zhuing, and Rin Shiyu headed straight for the slave market. The fat guy saw customers and flashed a sleazy grin, revealing jagged yellow teeth. He asked if we were buying women. Rin Shiyu pointed at the 6 Chinese girls. As soon as she spoke, he realized she wasn't a local. Seeing we wanted to buy all the Chinese girls, he frowned and asked if we were from Longtong. Even though he was a member of the Sword Slayer Society, these slaves were captured by his team. Selling them back to Long Tongue made him very reluctant. Rin Xiu simply asked if they were for sale, trying to suppress the urge to punch him in the face. The fat guy laughed loudly, mocking that Long Tongue dared to sneak into the Sword Slayer Society's territory. He said they were getting bolder, then shamelessly checked Rin Xiu out from head to toe. Jiang Zhuiying's eyes turned cold, and she almost drew her blade, but Rin Xiu secretly stopped her since this was the Sword Slayer Society's turf. And she still wasn't sure if they were connected to light. If they were, things would get extremely complicated. The fat man observed my group more than once. When the 6 female slaves heard I wanted to buy them, their eyes lit up with a faint glimmer of hope. Even though they didn't know me, at least I was a fellow countryman, Chinese like them. A few couldn't help but look at the fat guy, waiting to see what price he'd set. Just then, he flashed a sinister smile and slowly said that several of these 6 were still virgins. If we wanted to buy them, the price was 3 mutated spirit cores. Not a penny less. 3 mutated spirit cores. Hearing that number, Rin Xiu immediately frowned. Earlier, she had heard the fat guy quoting a price of only 1 or 200 pounds of beast meat per female slave. Even if these girls were rare stock, their total value was only around half to 1 spirit core. He was clearly price gouging, intentionally making things difficult. The slave girls' faces turned pale. They understood their value in this society all too well. They also knew the fat guy didn't really want to sell. He was just taking the opportunity to squeeze out more profit. Rin Xiu looked at me awkwardly. Buy them, I said. I didn't want to linger. I just gave the fat guy a deep look, silently memorizing his face. Hearing me say that, the 6 slave girls all looked grateful. They clearly didn't expect me to be willing to pay such a high price. Jiang Zhuiying took out 3 mutated spirit cores, preparing to hand them over. But just then, I suddenly felt a strange energy. This vibration came from the spirit cores, making me freeze instantly. Seeing this, the fat guy coldly asked if I didn't want to buy them anymore. I didn't answer. Ever since I absorbed the blue plague mother, my brain had undergone an inexplicable change. I calmly focused, following the vibration that made the spirit cores hum. I quickly pinpointed the direction. The energy came from a corner of the slave market, where a group of ragged people sat. It was radiating from a frail, filthy woman huddling in the corner. I looked closely at her, a sense of disbelief rising within me. Since I was mentally linked with Rin Xiu, I asked her directly through our connection if she noticed anything special about that woman. Xiu scanned the direction I pointed and replied that she seemed normal, gaunt, filthy, like someone about to die of hunger and disease. Still, because I was paying attention to her, Xiu checked more thoroughly. She found that the woman's spiritual aura was very faint, a state usually seen in those who don't have long to live. I pondered. The vibration that triggered the spirit cores was still continuously emitting from that woman's body. I asked Jiang Zhuiying through our mental link if she felt anything. Zhuiying said she wasn't sure, but looking at that person felt quite comfortable. I nodded. Zhuiying's words confirmed my suspicion. There was no reason for someone so gaunt and filthy to make others feel pleasant. I pointed at the woman in the corner and asked the fat guy how many pounds of beast meat she cost. Being pointed at, the woman finally reacted. She looked up at me briefly before bowing her head again. The fat guy was surprised, then sneered, mocking that he didn't expect me to have a taste for torturing such a pathetic piece of merchandise. No one wanted a slave who was about to die. He immediately tossed out a price of 30 pounds of mutated beast meat. I agreed instantly, certain that this woman had a secret. Buying 7 people at once meant the base vehicle didn't have enough room. I had to buy 2 more SUVs for them to drive themselves. In the apocalypse, cars were cheap as dirt. They were everywhere. Initially, I planned to stay in the Sword Slayer Society's safe zone for a while to dig for info on light. But because of the strange connection between this woman and the spirit cores, I decided to leave early. A few hours later, Jiang Zhuiying had bathed the frail woman and changed her into clean clothes. But her appearance hadn't changed: sallow skin, a withered body, and hair as dry as straw from malnutrition. When I walked over, she looked up at me once and then fell silent again. I introduced myself in the local language I had just learned and asked for her name, but she didn't respond. I patiently observed her and suddenly noticed a mysterious energy vibration on her skin. It made her shape and face seem covered by a layer of mist, but when I blinked, everything returned to normal, gaunt and haggard as before. With my evolved brain, I didn't believe it was just a hallucination. I kept watching, and when that blurry feeling appeared again, I finally confirmed it was just a disguise. I couldn't even be sure if the person was actually male or female. Unable to get more info, I said that if she wouldn't tell me her name, I'd call her Yellow Flower. Rin Xiu stood nearby and smiled, translating it. But since the term was hard to explain, she had to use Chinese. Hearing that, the woman finally raised an eyebrow and asked in a raspy voice what yellow flower meant. I felt a bit embarrassed and said it was a plant with yellow flowers, also known as the forget-worry herb. Xiu immediately used the local language to explain the meaning of the forget-worry herb. The woman looked dazed for a moment and said it was a nice name. I just stayed silent, my mind full of questions. Just then, Rin Xiu whispered that someone was approaching. I turned to look and saw a convoy driving from the end of the road. The lead vehicle flew a flag with a five-clawed dragon. I immediately thought of Long Tongue. When the convoy was about 100 meters away, a man in his 30s with a sturdy build, tanned skin, and wearing faded military fatigue stepped out. From a distance, he asked in Chinese if we were Chinese and requested to meet and talk. After I nodded, he led two others forward. They weren't carrying weapons, clearly wanting to show goodwill. I stepped out of the car and observed the man closely. He introduced himself as Jiang Cheng and reached out for a handshake. I noticed thick calluses on his hands from long-term firearm use. I gave my name. He laughed loudly, saying he almost thought we were family. Then he mentioned me spending 3 mutated spirit cores to buy people, a price far exceeding the normal rate for slaves. Jiang Cheng said bluntly that he didn't know if I bought them out of compassion or for another purpose, but he hoped I could let those girls follow him back to Long Tongue. After saying that, he opened his hand to reveal 3 mutated spirit cores. They weren't very potent and were even stained with blood. He smiled sheepishly, saying their organization had no reserves. This time, they had worked hard to scrape this much together to save their people, plus another 200 pounds of beast meat to make up the difference. An SUV carrying the beast meat drove up. I glanced at it and shook my head, saying it wasn't necessary. They hadn't had it easy either. I guess that Long Tongue was currently living a very difficult life. Oppressed by the Sword Slayer Society, they must have used every means possible to get spirit cores to trade for evolution crystals for their brothers. This time, with people captured, they didn't have the strength to snatch them from the Sword Slayer Society, so they had to rush to gather spirit cores for ransom. The fact that they still chose to do this proved that Long Tang's decision-makers still had some humanity left. That's exactly why Long Tongue had survived until now. If they lost their humanity and fought amongst themselves while surrounded by enemies, their destruction would only be a matter of time. I said plainly that I didn't buy these girls to keep them. I just didn't want them to be mistreated. Now that Long Tang's people were here, I wouldn't make things difficult. But in return, I wanted them to investigate a few things regarding organizations in the island nation. Saying this, I wrote 2 words in Jiang Cheng's palm: light and weapon. I explained that the first organization was very mysterious, while the second was searching for something of immense power. I wasn't sure exactly what it was, but I hoped they could help gather information. Jiang Cheng was stunned. He guessed it might be a type of weapon, but weapon was too vague. Still, the fact that I spent 3 spirit cores just for information made him realize its importance. Jiang Cheng immediately promised to do his best and said Long Tongue could ask for support from their forces in Edo. I was a bit surprised to learn Long Tongue was present in 4 locations, but I understood this was a struggle for survival. Only by linking up could they live. I nodded. In this game, there is no right or wrong, only winners and losers. When resources run dry, war might never end. Just as I was thinking, Rin Xiu's voice rang in my head, saying that when I wrote the words light and weapon, she felt a very strong spiritual vibration suddenly erupt from that frail girl. I was startled. Writing in someone's palm is very hard to detect. Even the recipient might not see it clearly. Unless they were a paranormal like Jiang Cheng, outsiders would have almost no way of knowing. Yet, Yellow Flower had a reaction. Unless she understood the meaning of those 2 words, or even had a direct connection to them. Jiang Cheng took the opportunity to invite me to Long Tongue's base. expressing a desire to unite as fellow countrymen. I understood his intent. From my neat appearance in the apocalypse to easily producing 3 spirit cores, everything showed my team's strength. To Long Tongue, more strength meant another shield. But I had no intention of joining. I politely declined, suggesting we agree on a radio frequency and communication code. In the apocalypse, radio was almost the only way to communicate from a distance. Right then, I felt clear tension in Ren Shiyu's spirit. She warned that something was rushing toward us, very fast. Jiang Cheng's men immediately drew their guns. Their first instinct was a Sword Slayer Society ambush, but looking around, there was no one in sight. Ren Shiyu only had time to scream a warning before the ground beneath us suddenly buckled, and a pitch-black monster erupted from the earth. It looked like a giant pangolin, its mouth wide open, its body the size of a truck. I was stunned. This was a mutated beast, but it was far from ordinary. As soon as it appeared, its tail swept powerfully. 2 Long Tongue members were hit mid-body, their spines shattered, and their organs burst. They died instantly. Jiang Cheng's eyes turned bloodshot. He roared, hoisting a heavy machine gun and firing wildly. Bullets that could turn a concrete wall into a honeycomb only sparked against the monster. Though it was forced back a few steps, it roared and charged straight ahead. Its front legs stomped down, crushing an SUV like paper. I watched from a distance, my heart sinking. Metal. The scales on its back weren't bone, but actual metal. Its claws were metal too, and a special silver-toned alloy at that. 1 centimeter armor-piercing machine gun rounds did nothing, leaving only small dents. I couldn't believe it. How could a mutated beast develop metal in its body? It looked like an artificially modified biological war machine. Its eyes glowed bright red like headlights as it charged into the crowd to slaughter. Long Tang's men fell one by one. No one could resist. I immediately pushed Ren Shiyu into the base vehicle. From inside, she said this monster was extremely abnormal. Its spiritual form wasn't concentrated in the brain, but scattered throughout its body. That completely defied the laws of nature. Just then, the spiked tail lashed toward me. I leaped to avoid it. The ground was smashed into a deep crater, sending dirt and rocks flying. The Long Tongue girls screamed in panic. Looking down from the air, I could see even more clearly that the pangolin's body seemed modified with metal. Ren Shiyu shouted that there were spiritual threads connecting its body. It was very likely a remote-controlled puppet. A shiver ran down my spine. A metallized, mutated beast that was also a puppet. The person behind this was truly terrifying. At that moment, the pangolin suddenly lunged. Its target wasn't me, but the group of female slaves, specifically the frail girl, Yellow Flower. I held my breath. I didn't know her identity or abilities yet, but right now, she was very likely directly related to the weapon. I couldn't let her die. In that life or death moment, I surged forward, my feet slamming into the ground and shattering the stone. The monster pounced from above like a tiger on its prey, while I launched myself from below for a head-on collision. Everyone was stunned. The monster's power was obvious, yet I chose to face it head-on. I roared, my muscles bulging and veins popping. My hands erupted with blue light like 2 azure suns. I fully converted the power from the Plague Mother, channeling it into my fists. An earth-shattering explosion rang out. I slammed into the pangolin's belly, leaving a deep dent in its metal underside. The nearly 10-meter-long monster curled up like a shrimp and was sent flying. It rolled several times, crushing 3 SUVs and smashing through 2 concrete walls before stopping. It struggled to get back up, but the scales on its belly were shattered, and blood gushed out in torrents.